Okay, and we are live on YouTube.
Good morning and welcome to the May 3rd, 2022 public hearing and public meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. We will begin the morning by calling attendance, and I'll turn it over to Mark Silverman to call the roll.
Chair Carroll.
Here.
Vice Chair Bland.
Here.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Here.
Commissioner Chapin.
Here.
Commissioner Chen.
Here.
Commissioner Devonshire. Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Here.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Here.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Here.
And good morning again and welcome to the May 3rd public hearing and public meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. This hearing and meeting is being held via Zoom and live streamed on our YouTube channel. And if you would like to participate in any of the public hearing items, you may do so by joining the meeting at the estimated time shown on our agenda, which can be found on our website. And if you would just like to watch the proceedings, you may do so at our YouTube channel live or at any later time. And today's agenda will have both public hearing and public meeting items. We'll begin with a public meeting agenda, which are items that have already had a public hearing and are returning with a revised proposal in response to comments made at the last hearing and or meeting. And then we will move to our public hearing agenda to review new applications for work on designated properties. And with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Preservation, Corey Harala.
Hey, thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. We'll start today's preservation apartment agenda with public meeting item number 1, LPC 20-05637, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 475, lot 61. This is 72 Grand Street in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District, currently a vacant lot, and the application is to construct a new building. This was last presented at the public meeting of March 1st, 2022, and no action was taken at that time. Staff will do a brief introduction, and we will turn it over to the applicant after that, after we open the proceedings.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and open the proceedings now, just so that can be a seamless transition. So Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
Moved.
Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the applicants may speak after the staff introduces the project.
Good morning, Commissioners. Michelle Craron, Preservation Staff. This item was last presented at the public meeting of March 1st, 2022, and no action was taken at that time. The application is to construct a new building on a currently vacant lot. To remind the Commissioners, at the time of designation, there was a one-story building on the lot with a cast iron facade on Grand Street and a masonry and cast iron facade on Worcester Street, having lost its upper floors to a 1930s fire. The resulting one-story building existed on the site at the time of designation and was demolished. The cast iron elements were initially salvaged and then were subsequently removed from the site. The March 1st proposal is shown here and included storefronts throughout the base of the building, fixed windows with operable transoms at the upper floors, and a glass railing backed cornice termination at the roof. Commissioners present in both the public hearing and public meeting expressed a consensus of support for a contemporary design for the site. The commissioners at the public meeting also expressed a consensus of support for the shorter Grand Street facade. However, commissioners present at the public meeting expressed concerns that the proportions of the Worcester Street facade did not relate well to a cast iron precedent, and that the fenestration pattern could be simplified, that the cladding system lacked articulation and detailing, that the dark granite proposed at the base would contrast too much with the lighter cladding color and call undue attention to itself, and that the first floor storefront display windows appeared very tall and might benefit from the introduction of a transom window. The applicants have returned to present a revised proposal and will take you through those changes.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is David Katz, Principal of Katz Architecture, and I'm here to present our building at 72 Grand Street. One thing I just want to note, we worked on this building with Carmi B of RKTB Architects. Unfortunately, Carmi could not make it today for medical reasons, so we will do our best without him. As was noted, we last presented about 8 weeks ago, and prior to that back in 2020. So thank you for having us back again. We've refined the design with the assistance of the LPC staff, and I hope our revisions here address all of the concerns that were brought up. So what you're looking at here is the, on the right-hand side, it's the Soho Cast Iron Historic District boundary. On the left, you can see our building site. It's located at the northeast corner of Grand and Worcester Street. Next slide. On the left here is a 1940 tax photo of the building as it existed, as was mentioned. This was originally a 5-story building designed by George DeCuna. A fire in the 1930s brought it down to 1 story. It's since been demolished and it's no longer on the site. Just to the right of that is 74 Grand, which was actually rebuilt using the same cast iron elements that were there. So that's a recreation of a building that was on the site previously. Next. Here is a panoramic view looking east on Grand Street and north on Worcester Street with our site located in the center there. Next. And this is an aerial view indicating the volume of the building that we are proposing. It's a 5-story building with a basement and a setback penthouse that's not visible from the street, 5 stories in keeping with the surrounding buildings in the area. Next. Here's the view looking south on Worcester Street. Our building will be over on the left-hand side. You can see the vacant lot there. And next. And then this is a view looking west from down Grand Street. The beige building in just adjacent to our site is 74 Grand that I mentioned before. Next. And then some of our neighbors here on Grand Street. The photograph on the left is the George DeCuna building I mentioned at 74 Grand. To the right of that is a small taxpayer, just nondescript building. Adjacent to that at 78 Grand, you have a building that's typical of the district, a 5-story cast iron building with 3 bays and pronounced cornice. Next. And these are some of the neighbors on Worcester Street. As mentioned in our previous presentations, Worcester Street has a variety of building types. This building on the left, 40 Worcester Street, is immediately adjacent to our building. It has kind of a neo or sort of a Romanesque vocabulary. A couple doors up, you have another building which is about 100 feet wide with these rounded arches and smaller windows above. Again, in all cases, you see a pronounced cornice and a defined lower level. Just to the left of 42 Worcester, you see a corner building that's just a brick building with punched openings. Next. And then here, this is the building. Here we're at the intersection of Grand and Worcester. This building here was built, I believe it was 1879. It was built in phases. This one is, again, there's a lot of variation here. You have a sort of Art Nouveau building, a pronounced cornice above the first floor, a similarly pronounced cornice with a lot of articulation and modillions and brackets. And the next. And the variation in building typology in Soho is probably, it's perhaps no more apparent than on this very corner where our building is located. On the left, you have the George DeCuna building at 70 Grand, built in 1886. Again, very pronounced horizontals. You have an emphasized articulated cornice. There's a fair amount of decorative elements. You see these medallions or cartouches at the corners where the spandrels meet the columns. And then just across the street, you have a KPF building, a very modern, sort of ahistorical building, a simple grid, same from top to bottom. This is an aluminum composite material that was built in 2010. Next. And then as precedent, we looked at a number of buildings, but this one we looked at in particular for a few reasons, not the least of which is that it was designed by my colleague Carmi B of RKTB Architects. It's a building located on Broadway in Howard. It's a commercial building with a pronounced reinterpreted floating cornice. This is an aluminum composite material similar to what we are proposing. Next. So here we're getting into the view of Worcester Street and specifically how our building has been refined. There were a number of comments, a fair amount of feedback regarding the sort of busyness of the facade that people felt, the sort of manner style that you see on the upper elevation, where we varied the fenestration on the third and fourth floor to create a lower level that was, let's say, sort of higher or appeared to be higher. And there was also some concern about the lack of detail and articulation in the material. On the lower elevation, you could see that we've sort of quieted down the building and created a series of similar windows from top to bottom. We also brought the water table down to the just above the first floor, so it's a little more in keeping with the neighbors. Above that, the second, third, and fourth floor are identical. And then on the top floor, we varied it slightly by introducing a muntin line in the operable transom above. And then the cornice, which we've described before, is a floating cornice set off from the building with outriggers against a glass screen behind it. Here, as I pointed out, there's a lot of variation on the street. Worcester Street was a service street for West Broadway, the same way that Mercer was a service street or a secondary street to Broadway. Next slide. And then this is a view of the Grand Street elevation. There wasn't an enormous amount of change on this. It was generally well accepted. Again, the water table was brought down to just above the first floor. We have introduced some articulation, which I'll get into on the next couple of slides. Next. So this is a closer view of what we had presented previously. And to point out the feedback, once again, the comments were that this was somewhat flat. There was some question about the use of the material and the lack of articulation, the verticals and the horizontals. And the biggest, there were two other concerns, the biggest of which was the change in fenestration at the third and fourth floor. And then at the lower level, even though it's not visible here, the building comes down to a granite base. We were showing a black base that we have since changed in color to match more accurately with the aluminum composite material above. But the next slide. And then this is the modified version of the same elevation. Here you can see the ground floor cornices are more pronounced, and the floors above are identical, except at the top floor where we've introduced that muntin line. The other thing that we've added here is articulation at all of the verticals. So we've lightened up the columns by bending them back and giving them some articulation. We did the same thing with the mullions between the windows to create that hierarchy. And then the other thing that we did, I neglected to say before, is we've introduced this type of embellishment or a sort of modern medallion at the north and south bays of this structure. This does relate back to the original building on the site. The original building on the site had a cast iron facade on the Grand Street side. It turned the corner, and then there was a brick section in the center, and then on the end there was another cast iron section. So we're trying to relate back to that with the use of these medallions. Next. Here is the Grand Street facade. On the left, you can see what we had presented previously and the subtle changes that we made, bringing the water table down and introducing these decorative medallions. Next. This is the penthouse level. It's not really visible from the street. We can move on from here. Some sections. This is the longitudinal section looking north to south, showing the lines of sight. Likewise, looking across Worcester Street, the lateral section. Here you can see the floating cornice. So the cornice is set out from the building with these outriggers, and we have these vertical slats of glass. What we're trying to do here is in a more modern way, evoke a comparison with the pronounced bracketed cornices you see in the neighborhood with the modillions and the raking shadow that you would get with this cornice that's set away from the building. This is just a detail drawing showing the way we would. This is a steel frame building. We're wrapping it in an aluminum composite material. The larger elements here are the columns. The smaller ones are the mullions between the windows, which show the various setbacks that we've introduced since the last presentation. And next. And then this is a diagram just to show the level of detail that we've introduced to create this sort of crenellated, or this variation, I should say, in terms of the vertical elements to give them more shadow and detail and articulation. Next slide. The materials that we're looking at, the difference here from what we had presented last time, we had shown an absolute black granite base that we have since changed to this Hilburn Quarries granite, lighter in color, more in keeping with the Alucobomb material that we're proposing for the facing material. Windows would be a gray powder coat, and then the materials that you see below that are all on the penthouse, which is not visible from the street. And next. And then in the district, there are a variety of examples of the same material, and we looked at these buildings for the amount of detail they used and how these buildings sort of articulated that the metal panel. You can see at 40 Mercer, the way it turns the corner there, there's a sort of recess in that column. You have something similar at 433 Broadway. And then at 424 Broadway, you have a sort of framed recess, just to give it a bit of articulation on the facade. Next. And I'll finish here with some of the renderings that we had done, again, at our site at that intersection. Next slide. And this, it's maybe not so apparent with some of these. Some of them it's a little more apparent. But on I'm talking about our changes here. On the left-hand side, you can see the view looking east on Grand Street. The one thing that you will notice is the change in fenestration on the left compared to the right, where we were turning the corner. One of the concerns was that there was not so much of a relationship between the Worcester Street side and the Grand Street side, which we've corrected with this three-bay solution on the Worcester Street side. Next. This is the cornice showing the introduced muntin on the upper level. Next. And here you can see pretty clearly some of the changes that we've made. We've dropped the water table down, changed the black granite to a lighter colored granite. We've changed the fenestration on the Worcester Street side. The other thing that we've done is we've introduced a horizontal mullion on the ground floor in keeping with the adjacent buildings. And then, of course, we've added those decorative medallions at the corners. Next. And this is a view looking north on Worcester Street, our building on the right-hand side there. Same commentary as the previous slide. And then looking south, here you can see again, the change in how we've modified the windows to be more consistent. One of the concerns that, again, was that it was somewhat noisy. We wanted to do something that was a little quieter and didn't make such a statement. Next. And then finally, this is what we had presented previously. This is the view of the building looking west on Grand Street. You can see the building over there on the right. And in our next slide, these are the modifications we made. So one thing I didn't mention, in addition to articulating those vertical columns and mullions, we've also modified the spandrels to set them back slightly to lighten up the frame somewhat. We were looking at this as sort of a framed building. We were looking at, of course, looking at the cast iron as an influence on this vocabulary. And then following this, we've just included slides of the plans, which I'm happy to answer questions about, but there's not a lot to say specifically about this. And that's it. So I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I know we do have already some questions. So Commissioner Bland, please go ahead.
Thank you. My question is simple. From the property line, which I gather is where your columns are placed right on the property line, what is the dimension back to the glass line? How many inches?
You know, I have to check. I believe it was, I believe it's about 12 inches, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think we may be able to move right to our discussion. And so, Commissioners, as was presented, the image on the left is the previous proposal. And at the time, there were comments about the fenestration pattern and sort of typology, whether it was looking toward the variety you see in masonry buildings or the regularity that you see in cast iron buildings. I think the applicant has presented today that sort of modeling their design on the cast iron typology, which has a fairly regular fenestration pattern, which they have tried to incorporate here, along with adding, and I think there were questions about the material last time as well. And so the applicant has just presented more information on the level of new details added to it and how it expresses itself elsewhere in the district. So we'll begin our discussion with that. Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I think this building is appropriate as presented. I think that the regularity of the facades, the level of detail presented to me seems consistent with contemporary buildings that we have approved in the past in this district. I think that in general, the level of detail is adequate. I think that they've proven that the material that they're proposing to use can sustain that level of detail. I felt that was helpful. I think that the articulations that they've introduced at the mullions and at the columns and the spandrels are, recall the kind of texture that one associates with the district. I think the change in, I have two minor comments. I think that the articulation added at the top floor feels gratuitous to me. I don't think it's necessary, but if they like it, I don't think that it's, I don't think it adds anything to the scheme, but I think that it would not be something that I would feel compelled to have them change. And I worry about the granite base. I would suggest that the staff look at it with them in situ. In the photograph, it looked a little yellowish relative to the very gray of the proposed material. Might look a little funny, but I also would suggest that for a light building using a Lucabond, that I don't know if they were proposing to use it as a rain screen where it would have no joints or whether it would be caulked. I've seen a bunch of buildings that have the light colored metal panels of this type that don't weather particularly well. The silicone gets dirty and it kind of drips onto the facade, and they might want to think about having it be a rain screen application. But I think it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Yes, I agree that it's appropriate. In the day, I think I've been responsive to the commission's comments, and particularly in the area of the window proportions, the inclusion of transoms in the storefront level, the added articulation, and perhaps the more pronounced cornice over the storefront. And I think that the colors and the volume and the other aspects of the project are appropriate to the district.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith?
I agree. I think this has come a long way and is, as Michael Goldblum said, acceptable, approvable as is. I think that the attention to the details of proportions and the details at the corners have really helped, and the addition of the more pronounced cornice at the ground floor. I guess my only concern still is that the metallic finish of the Lucabond. So I think maybe a more appropriate finish would be a flat color, more like a paint color. But I think that that's something they could work with staff on. And I agree with Michael about the color of the granite. Again, something that they can work on with staff when they get actual samples. But otherwise, I think it's very successful.
Okay, great, thank you. Commissioner Shamir Baran?
Yes, thanks. I don't think I had any real concerns or issues about the fenestration pattern per se. I think that the kind of as they described it, the more mannerist version would have been just as, in my mind, appropriate as is this more regular pattern. My problem has been and continues to be with the Lucabond material. I absolutely agree with Commissioner Holford Smith that if used as proposed, it absolutely should have a kind of a paint matte finish rather than the metallic. But even that, in my mind, doesn't help. I think the Lucabond, in all the cases where it happens in this district, is not right because it's so heavy-handed, and it doesn't approximate the cast iron's kind of ambiguity or its references to masonry, and then the fact that it's actually not the detail, the elaborate capacity for the cast iron to do the kind of ornamentation that the historic buildings had. This Lucabond doesn't. Its details are just ham-handed. I just find them to be absolutely not inspiring. However, I do think that I agree that it's acceptable, as others have said, and relatively appropriate. And so, I mean, I won't not approve it, but I really have to express my sort of my dislike of the Lucabond in this application. That's it, I think.
Thank you. Commissioner Gustafson?
Yeah, I think the last time around, my concern was with the arrangement of the fenestration. Otherwise, I think it was fairly good last time around, and I think it's appropriate, and I agree with the previous comments from both Commissioner Goldblum and Commissioner Holford Smith.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Jefferson?
The facade has been simplified, and the simplification calms it down from the last presentation. I think what has happened is that the cornice has become dominant now, but it's fine. It's a dominant element. My concern is the Luca bond, as other commissioners, and the base material, because the rhythm of the base seems so odd to me in relationship to the simplicity of the facade, up and down, up and down, up and down. So it's a bit confusing, but I can accept that. So those are the two issues, and the project, as I see, is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi.
Hi. So I don't think I was here for the last meeting. However, based on what I'm seeing today and what I understand the commissioner's comments were, which I agree with, and looking at the first version, I think this project looks, is a good project. And the changes that have been made have enhanced it. I, in particular, think that this regularity of the fenestration makes a lot of sense and is more, makes the building facade much more cohesive. I happen to agree about the comments on the cornice, but I'm not going to object in a major way. And I agree with Commissioner Holford-Smith's and others' comments about working with staff on the Aluka bond and the paint and making the finish a lot more flat and even.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bland.
Last time, I think I took great exception to the arrangement of the windows on the Worcester facade as being discordant with cast iron architecture in the district. The changes that have been made, I think, have rectified that and have brought it into line. It's still a contemporary building, referencing, of course, the great typology of cast iron in New York. So kudos for that. I have also the same concerns that have already been expressed about Alucobond. I think the Alucobond material, to me, it's something that is for suburban office buildings. I may be wrong. It may be that we have used it and approved it in historic districts. It was referenced that way by the applicant. But if that's so, I guess we maybe shouldn't and can't reject it at this point. I'm not willing to do that. But boy, does it have to be carefully worked out, the detailing of it and the seams and the caulking and all of that, which Michael Goldblum referenced, really has to be worked very, very closely. And I don't think those details have been submitted so far. So, so anyway, I just I'm voting in favor, but with a caveat that, yeah, with a lot of work with staff.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I'm in agreement here with most of the comments. The applicant has made an improvement on the exterior facade, and I think the base and the Luca bond, as commissioners have indicated, that they need to work with staff.
Okay. Okay, so I think we actually are all in agreement on this. I think we conceptually can go ahead and vote to approve this, but contingent upon the applicant continuing to work closely with the staff on the details and the final finish of the Aluka bond and the final finish or sample of the granite. And did I say details? Final finishing details of the Aluka bond, if I didn't say that, and particularly the seams and joints and the granite material. So Commissioner Goldblum, would you make a motion to approve with the conditions that they work with the staff on the finish and detailing of the Aluka bond and the final color sample for the granite?
Sure. Regarding 72 Grand Street in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District, the vacant lot where the application is to construct a new building, I note that the site is a vacant lot, that the original multi-story cast iron building on this site was reduced to one story by a fire in the 1930s, that the resulting one-story building with cast iron features existed on the site at the time of designation and was demolished. cast iron elements were salvaged, and the design was approved by the LPC for a new building on the site, incorporating those features. Subsequently, the cast iron elements were removed from the site. The owner paid a $150,000 fine to the LPC for the lost historic fabric. I also note that the intersection of Grand and Worcester Streets currently consists of a mix of 4 to 6 story masonry and cast iron manufacturing, commercial, and loft buildings built between the 1870s and the early 20th century, and an 8-story metal and glass building built in the early 21st century. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the construction of the new building on this vacant lot will enhance the character of the historic district by reinforcing the street wall on both streets and reestablishing a built corner at the intersection of Worcester and Grand Streets. That the proposed building's height and massing will be consistent with the height and massing of historic store and loft buildings found throughout the historic district. That the facade composition, featuring vertically oriented openings and piers, large, deeply inset windows, horizontal bands, similar in scale to cast iron framing and decorative elements, will recall the typical facade hierarchies of historic cast iron buildings found throughout the historic district, thereby helping the building to harmonize with the streetscapes. That the composition of ground floor components, including piers, display windows with transom, stone bulkheads, and entrance doors with transoms, will be compatible with the commercial character of the streetscape. That the tripartite division of the narrow Grand Street facade's upper floors and first floor storefront and secondary entrance will relate well to the adjacent 74 Grand Street facade and other 3 bay cast iron facades found throughout the historic district. That the modular repetitive fenestration of the Worcester Street facade is in keeping with the fenestration patterns typically found on longer facades of cast iron buildings within the historic district. That the materials palette of aluminum composite panels, light gray finished windows, and a light stone base, along with gray finished stucco and mechanical screening at the rooftop bulkheads and enclosure, will harmonize with the materials and finishes of the historic and contemporary buildings found throughout this historic district. The glass guardrail, in combination with the projecting metal cornice element, will evoke in a contemporary way terminating cornice elements found throughout the historic district. That the penthouse, stair, and elevator bulkhead mechanical enclosure are typical of rooftop accretions found in buildings throughout the historic district in terms of size, placement, and finish, and will only be seen at a distance from oblique angles. However, I recommend that the applicant work with the staff to consider changing the finish, color, and level of gloss of the metal panels. They review with staff the detailing of the metal panels and the methods of installation of the metal panels, and that they review with staff the color and compatibility of the granite base to the metal panel choices made.
Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron. Commissioner Shamir Barron?
I think she had to jump off, yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 9 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, that's approved with those conditions. Please continue to work with the staff on those details and finish choices. And we will now move to the next public meeting item.
Okay, and that is public meeting item number 2, LPC 22-00550, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1129, Lot 39, 6 to 16 West 77th Street in the Upper West Side Central Park West Historic District. This is a neo-Renaissance style apartment building designed by Nathan Korn and built in 1927. And the application is to construct a rooftop addition. This was last presented at the public meeting of January 25th, 2022. no action was taken at that time. The staff will do a brief introduction before turning it over to the applicant to present the revised proposal after we open the proceedings.
Okay, thanks. And we'll go ahead and open the proceedings now so that can be a seamless transition. So Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second, sorry.
You read my mind. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the applicants may speak after the staff introduces the project.
Morning, Commissioners. Dina Posner, Preservation Staff. This application to demolish an existing penthouse and construct a new rooftop addition was first heard at the public hearing and meeting of November 16th, 2021. A rendering of that proposal is in the upper left-hand corner of this slide. At the first review, the commissioners expressed support for the demolition of the existing penthouse. However, several commissioners raised concerns regarding the size and visibility of the proposed addition and asked that the applicant restudy the massing and the placement of the addition, especially the upper level or 18th floor, and explore whether the whole addition could be lowered. A revised proposal was then heard at the public meeting of January 25th, 2022, and a rendering of that revised proposal is in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. At that public meeting, several commissioners indicated that the size and visibility of the addition needed to be further reduced. Some commissioners also expressed concerns about the color contrast created between the dark color of the metal cladding and the light color of the ceilings. In summary, the commissioners asked that the applicants look at the addition holistically and further restudy the addition in terms of its size and visibility, as well as explore the materiality and finishes of the addition to help it better blend and recede as part of the skyline. The applicant has made further revisions in response to these comments and is here to present their updated proposal. I'll turn it over to the applicant.
So the applicant team may begin.
Commissioner Sarah Carroll, commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to represent our proposal. In effect, we've moved from 2 stories of accommodation down to a single story. And the height overall is the same as it is now. In other words, we've lowered it by 3 feet so that we line up with the elevator overruns. Like the present arrangement, it cannot be seen from the street. From the longer views from the park, for example, it will now recede more by virtue of the color. So we've revised that from the quite contrasting black of the original proposal to something which is a mid-gray and relates much more to the sky views. I think that's really the essence of the redesign. In summary, to go from 2 stories of accommodation to a single story and to reduce down to the present height of the overruns.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to move through the slides?
I think the idea was that perhaps Bill Higgins was going to set the context.
Thanks, Lord Foster. I'm Bill Higgins of Higgins Quaysbarth. And I'd like to just very briefly reiterate some of the background and appropriateness points that we had made in previous appearances before the commission. Russell, are you running the slides? If you
I am, Bill. Yep.
Can you go back 1, please? Great, thank you. So just following on what Lord Foster said, This is, of course, not a view that anyone would actually see, but it does really illustrate nicely a number of the points that we think are important to considering appropriateness. First of all, looking at the top of the building at what is accurately referred to these days as the pink stucco box. That is level 17. I think you can see that it's secondary, tertiary in terms of its design, character, et cetera, and that with the change from the previous brick, the original brick, to stucco, radical changes to the openings, et cetera, it is a tertiary original element that has further lost a huge amount of its character. But what I think this shows, and what the revised proposal really reiterates, is that what there was a 17th floor. This setback, originally a very secondary sort of service residential use, a one-story volume, and on top of it were these visible brick volumes of stair and elevator enclosures and some other sort of service volumes. What the revised proposal does is to reiterate that condition that existed before, where there is one level of space that is clearly habitable, and then what is above is not kind of lived in space, doesn't read as lived in space. It is sort of neutral service and functional space. I think that's a really crucial change that has been made in this revision, and one I hope the commissioners will take into consideration. Just very briefly, again, we are dealing, as you can see here, with in fact, a tertiary level of architecture. This building was always about, and has always been about, the 77th Street facade. And there is a peculiarity of its history, which I think is kind of relevant here, particularly if the commissioners are thinking about the question of precedent. There is a bit of an oddity, which we haven't really talked much about, with respect to the history of the New York Historical Society building. And that is that the original part, the southern part, was built in 1908. And it wasn't until 1937, 10 years after our building was constructed, that northern portion that's visible in the lower right corner here, lower left corner here, was actually completed. So that at the time that 6 West 77th Street was being built, there was this uncertainty about what was going to happen at the Historical Society, this sort of 10-year period where it was unclear what might have happened. So I don't want to overstate this, but it's kind of a unique situation in that, in one sense, it's a typical side elevation, which is unornamented and just kind of utilitarian. On the other hand, because it does face at some distance Central Park West and the park, it's in this odd position that something more might have been done. But because of the uncertainty of the Historical Society, it ended up just being yet another sort of side facade, but one that has an odd twist of its history. So I guess what we're saying here is that this is in some ways a typical secondary, tertiary side elevation, but it also has this oddity of history, which makes it a rather unique situation. Next, and let's just go through these quickly. So there is the location. You can see the red portion, which is the 17th floor existing and proposed footprint. Above that sort of northern portion of the Historical Society, with the Museum of Natural History across the street, and the park across the street to the east. Next. So historical photo, that's fine. This is the main, obviously the main reading that the building has always been intended to have. Next. And the tax photo from 1940 showing the sort of hierarchical condition and the relationship to the Historical Society. Next. And just a brief look at this, at what we're thinking of as the hierarchy. On the left, you've got the main sort of primary facade. In the center, you've got that secondary facade over the historical society. And then on the right, you've got the what we're calling the tertiary facades of the 17th floor rooftop construction. And then that view on the lower right shows the degree to which it's been altered with the stucco and with the very significant changes to the windows, et cetera. And then those volumes visible above it, particularly those two stair elevator enclosures, which represent the same height as our now proposed 18th non-residential, non-lived-in level. Next. Just to say that the existing and proposed condition is very typical of what you see on the west side, where you get these juxtapositions of taller and shorter buildings and primary facades, and then lots of secondary side and rear elevations, and then on top of those, the utilitarian volume. So the existing and the proposed conditions certainly fit into that typical situation. Next. And just to mention here, these are a number of buildings, typical examples of one-story plus functional utilitarian enclosures above, additions that have been approved and found appropriate by the commission on the Upper West Side. And one thing we think is important is that there are a number of languages that the commission has found appropriate, from really pretty historical in character to some more sort of abstracted ones, and then particularly this one in the center, where there really is quite a modern language that is used. So the commissioners have found a variety of languages to be appropriate. And again, as Lord Foster has articulated in the past, the philosophy here is that in the evolution of historic buildings and historic places, a contemporary modernist language is a very appropriate way to express the ongoing growth and evolution. And this, we think, fits precisely into that approach. Next, and I think final slide. The immediate context. I always think it's important to remember that directly across the street is the Museum of Natural History, and I don't know that we have any better example in New York City of how a historic place can evolve, including quite contemporary and carefully, thoughtfully designed new portions of construction. And although in a much smaller and more modest way, we feel that what we're proposing today fits into that. And just finally, on the bottom, this nice Central Park West and Central Park view, which makes the paradoxical point that we are not a Central Park West building and are not pretending to be. But we do feel that this kind of intervention deserves to be thoughtfully designed and deserves to have a genuine architectural language that is a worthy one and a worthy part of the evolution of this district. And we feel that this design really hits that balance point of being carefully and thoughtfully designed without calling undue attention to itself. So it both fits into its broader Central Park context, but also recognizes that this is a secondary building that sits back from the park. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So I just want to take over from here. So obviously, the existing conditions of the penthouse at the moment is connected to a lower floor, level 16. These were originally maids' quarters, and it's had many evolutions over its life, being connected, and then the current state is a collection of interconnecting apartments today. As both Norman and Bill have highlighted, as you can see here, highlighted in the purple, or modifications to the penthouse over its life. Originally it was brick, and there's been a number of windows added and additions, historical railings removed, and greenhouses added to the building. But as you can see, there's many changes through its life. Looking at the side elevation, obviously it is sits adjacent to another penthouse box here, but you can see the elevator overruns which are existing. These do not open to the level 18. These are the overruns from the level 17 below. And we think it's very important that proportions match for the level 17, as we've explained before. So looking from above, obviously, again, a view that you don't see, and obviously you have the elevator overruns at the top here, but also a collection of MEP and chimneys which have been added over its life and history. And really our proposal is to consolidate those utilitarian elements and bring them together in an enclosure that matches the elevator overruns. Also bringing up a new fire stair to this new roof level, which doesn't exist today, accesses via ladders at the moment. So improving the life safety of the building. So really this constitutes the majority of what the new enclosure will actually contain. So as explained, this is where we were previously, where we had the glass enclosure upstairs at level 18. But the level 17 is consistent through the designs, where this is an open plan pavilion residential property, which is surrounded by a garden. As we came back in January, we looked at trying to modify the heights and minimize it, bringing it down around 19 inches and separating the MEP out to try and reduce its overall mass and visibility. But obviously it was felt this still had a presence on the street. So really looking at minimizing the level 18, turning it into a utilitarian enclosure. This is 53% volumetrically smaller than our original proposal, and really just matching that elevator overruns. Starts creating, it makes it invisible from the streetscape around on all sides. Obviously visible from the park itself, but not from any of the streets that surround the project. And obviously a summary here of seeing that volumetric moves that we've made throughout the life of the project, and really thinking, carefully about, maintaining sort of the clarity of the lower pavilion, which is really a replacement and not having an addition now. Just seeing the cross section side by side, you can see how we're lining up with the elevator overruns shown in red here, and also running through the datums of the existing roof parapets and the tiles. And then the evolution showing where we were in November and how we've tried to bring that height down. But really, this is just the MEP enclosure on that upper roof. From a footprint point of view, looking down on it, obviously about 50% of it is MEP. We have the dark boxes here, which are the elevator overruns, which will be retained. And to reduce visibility, we've ensured that we are tight on the eastern side up against those elevator overruns. Where we were historically, the pink dotted line here, we brought that back both on the north and on the south to ensure that we don't have visibility from the streetscape below. And also you can see here the new stair tower coming up and some additional storage we're adding in. So really just thinking now about the coloration, a zoom in of that level 18 and where we were with the glass enclosure at the top, which posed issues though of materiality and of illumination. And as we looked at stepping it down, we then had the other conversation, which is about coloration and really looking at the best way to make a receding volume up against that skyline. And as you saw from the photograph that Bill shared earlier, we are looking back at this from the park. So trying to blend it into that rooftop utilitarian architecture collection that we have that runs through on 77th Street, the water towers, the galvanized metalwork, the lead, the zinc, and bringing that color through as a matte finish into our metalwork that will be enclosure, but also the perimeter edging around our parapet. So that it lessens the contrast with the roofscape. And then seeing a summary of the moves that we've made from where we were to where we are today. Obviously, we have a very simple material palette running through the project by the nature of it being the pavilion. The upper level here was the materials we chose, and we were looking at a black and stainless steel, but we're now proposing a more zinc colored matte finished metalwork. And obviously glass is still the dominant material. I'm learning from our experience on many projects, getting low iron glass so it doesn't have any tinting in it, having a low reflectivity, the same type of glass we would use in retail projects to really reduce its glare and the way the light hits it. But again, thinking about warming up that ceiling color. We did look at darker colors for the ceiling, but we found that created more contrast against the sky. So a paler ceiling, but a warm pale ceiling seemed to fit the best. This is just showing a cross section through the structure, and obviously As we said before, we have a new steel cradle that sits across the project. And this is really ensuring that we can spread the loads of the new pavilion evenly across the historical columns that run through the project. So ensuring we have a new insulated, safe roof on top of the project. And then the majority of materials are the glass, which are with minimal frames. And then we have a series of internal and external blinds providing privacy, light control, and actually help us with bird impacts. So this is a view looking back from the park, seeing the illumination. Obviously, in our earlier conversations, illumination was a key concern of the project. And we're working with Susan Tillotson on the lighting here, based in New York, removing any external lighting on the project. And with our transparency, you can see right in. So it's really about not uplighting that ceiling and not washing our central core walls to really make it blend into the background and not illuminating the upper story. So that really starts getting the silhouettes that you see of the water towers beyond. And then a zoom in of how the fenestration works. Again, really looking at minimal detailing within here, the operable glass windows that can slide back. But then by night, when those are closed, how do we reduce the glare? We have a series of internal macro shades. From our experience, a more darker color actually works very well behind glass and is less visible from the streetscape. But we also have then an external macro shade, which will be deployed when solar gains are very high. This actually works very well with bird impact as well. And we're working with Andrew Farnsworth from Cornell Lab Ornithology to look at the best way of doing that. And this is an intelligent system where we can deploy the external blinds at points of high migration for birds, really thinking about bird impacts and trying to mitigate that. That actually also comes into the landscaping, ensuring we have low landscaping that doesn't encourage roosting for birds. So I think the key message for all of this is really the views. So this is the current condition. As we said before, from 77th Street, immediately adjacent in front of the building, you cannot see the existing penthouse box as it stands. It's only when you move it all the way across the Central Park West does the existing pink stucco penthouse become visible. Now, over the duration of the project, when we showed you before, we had the level 18 was partially visible at the top. We then tried to reduce that with our scheme that came back. But really, where we are today, that elevator, the fact we're matching those elevator overruns in its height and its setback means that we no longer have visibility to level 18 from the streetscape around. So really comparing top left here with the existing and bottom right here, showing that only the level 17 datum runs through and that level 18 now becomes invisible. That then continues obviously around all the streetscapes. From 76th Street, you have the open lot view looking up. So obviously we know this lot is going to be infilled at, later on in its life. But currently when we had our January scheme, there was an element of visibility. Where we are today, there's no visibility on the right-hand side. And again, moving down Central Park West, visibility was seen in our previous attempts. And again, no visibility on the right-hand side here for level 18. And that really is tracked through even in the views where we don't have leaves on the trees, probably the most visible view looking through here in the winter conditions. And obviously we had a presence where we had the taller, the addition on level 18. But as we move forward to where we are today, that now that the enclosure at the top is not visible at all. And just showing the comparison from where we were in January to where we are today. And I think finally, I think we acknowledge that there will be some visibility of the enclosure top. As you can see in this photograph, just above the pink stucco is the elevator overruns, which is just popping up. And that obviously is visible from within the park itself. Where we were back in November, which had a high level of visibility and there was elements of concern. But as we move forward to the January scheme, trying to reduce that and balance it, still had visibility. So where we are today, you're just catching a glimpse of the sort of utilitarian MEP enclosure that sits there. And again, matching the same height as the existing elevator overruns to minimize its impact. And finally, really just showing from top left to bottom right where we are, just matching those kind of enclosures at the top. And finally, that park view all the way back. As you can see here, the existing conditions with the elevator overruns visible at the very top in dark. And again, the variations of the schemes we looked at in January, and where we are today. So that level 18 MEP enclosure starts talking to the sort of the rooftop dunnage, the water towers, trying to recess as much as possible into that kind of granular quality further down 77th Street, not trying to be a Central Park West building. And just giving you then the comparison between the two. So in summary, it's our final slide for the presentation. Obviously, we feel it's appropriate to sort of replace the much damaged and altered pink stucco box, ensuring that our new pavilion is proportionally matching in height and footprint. And then the big moves are obviously the materiality, lessening the sort of the black contrast, and then obviously the enclosure at the roof, minimizing that as much as possible to ensure that it's not visible from the streetscape. So I believe we do have a video which shows the sort of side-by-side comparison of those. And I think I'd have to show that from our end, I believe. Okay, let's see if this works. Hopefully you can see the screen. And this is really just showing you a side-by-side comparison. On the left-hand side is the existing conditions. On the right-hand side is the new proposed level 17 pavilion. As you can see, no level 18 visible because we're on the street, we're not in the park, we're in here. But again, the proportions and the footprint matching the existing. Obviously, with the one point to add that we don't have the sort of the fire escape addition that sticks out on the eastern side, which you can see on the left-hand side here. So really maintaining a very simple geometry you see of that roofscape and the transparency of the glass allowing you to see into the roof and the ceiling. And then taking a step back into the park, seeing that viewpoint where you do see on the left the elevator overruns just popping up above. And then on the right, you're seeing the new MEP enclosure. So the very neutral utilitarian enclosure on the roof. So I think we've gone through those points quite extensively. So I think I would like to hand back.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. I will note for the record that we did receive letters addressing the revised proposal. And so we did receive 34 letters in opposition and 32 letters of support, which as always have been shared with you in advance of today's public meeting. So I think if we don't have any questions, we can move to our discussion. So commissioners, I am sending you all a request to unmute so that we can have that discussion. And, you know, I want to thank the applicants for their continued work and thought and trying to respond to all of the comments that we've had over the last the public hearing and the last public meeting. And, you know, I think where we were last time is that the commission recognized that there were historically rooftop additions on apartment buildings in the Upper West Side, Central Park West Historic District, as there is on this building. And so the discussion really focused, I think, that around the appropriateness of replacing the existing addition with a similar addition, and as the applicants presented, the discussion really focused on the finish and of the ceiling and the exterior elements and the 18th floor and how that is perceived. And so we had a range of comments. Some people were supportive and some people felt that some aspects of it, either the finish or the 18th floor and finish needed to be restudied, and some felt that the overall visibility needed to be more significantly reduced. So we'll go ahead and have our discussion. And Commissioner Jefferson, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. I think last time you actually were supportive of the proposal as it was presented last time, but you did raise a question about the finish, and the applicants are now proposing this more neutral zinc finish, which I think it relates better to the materials on the building, but also the sort of more utilitarian materials that you find on the roofscape. So Commissioner Jefferson, how are you feeling today?
Well, I'm feeling much happier, but also the perception of the building is very interesting to me architecturally. So I'll start with where we left off. The reduction of scale on the penthouse makes a big difference. The cladding color from black to a gray, the perception of that edge makes a big difference in the way the edge is viewed and the plane is viewed. The overall effect is an abstract plane that's viewed from below, and that perception is really fascinating to me because it was a volume and now it's a plane, and it works. I like the abstraction of that, but it is different. From Central Park, the penthouse would be a beacon of light, regardless. It's unique to its context, and I can accept that. And what makes me able to approve this is that in its near context, across the street, nearby, you don't see as much of the building. You just see the edge condition, which the other existing structure had a edge condition also, pretty much the same. So I can accept the how do I put it? Because of the scale and proportion changes and lack of visibility in the local context, I can accept this.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Commissioner Chapin, I think last time you also were fairly comfortable with the contemporary approach for replacing the existing addition, but also you commented on the finish and hoping for a more neutral or lighter finish, not going as far as white, but something more neutral. So how are you feeling about it today?
Yes, you're correct. And I think we all started with a basic question of whether a modern addition could be appropriate on Central Park West. And the issue, while I very much like the design, the visibility, I thought, also might create a disjunction with the historic building if it were viewed relatively closely as was originally possible. So I think the substantial reduction that they have made in size means that you really only have limited views from Central Park West. I think that it's modern but very light and simple, and the color and finish changes I think have made it more appropriate. And I think that the doing a luminosity control is also an important feature that will help with any visibility issues that may be a problem. So I think it's very attractive, and I think it is really appropriate. And I just don't think that the amount of visibility is going to create any problem with the historic building and historic district. So I'm happy to approve this as presented.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldblum, you also commented on the finish, but you also had concerns about the visibility of the 18th floor and the way that you saw it, noting that many of the historic penthouses that were visible had a more utilitarian bulkhead on top, but not a two-story designed addition. And I think the scale of the glass, particularly at that floor, unified the entire composition in a way that I think changed the scale relationship to the building for you. If I got that right. So I guess the question is, have the changes at the 18th floor and the finish and sort of rethinking the warmth of the ceiling color, you also raised the ceiling as well. Have those addressed your concerns?
The answer is yes, they have, and I think it's appropriate. But Everardo said exactly what I was thinking. this is just such a fascinating example of scale versus size, right? All across the country, the regulations related to historic district compatibility focus on the word scale. And I was doing this job somewhere else, and it came up, what's the difference between scale and size? And it was something that was very hard to kind of put your finger on. But this is it. I mean, if it ever comes up again, this is going to be the example I give, because it's the same exact size as what was here before, but because it has no articulations and it's this single plane that you kind of in your mind, even though you see it in glimpses as you move around, reads as a single very large object. It has a much bigger scale than its size. And as a result, I think the impact is very different from the mincing little windows and jogs and doors of the pink box. And as a result of that, it does feel considerably bigger than what was there before. But because it is the same size, and because it is the visibility of the penthouse has been reduced and lightened by the choice of color, I think that it is appropriate. But it does raise very interesting questions that we can choose to grapple with now or later. But and I do think this is appropriate as presented. But I mean, another thing that I thought of is because it has no articulations, and because it's really an almost, it's a minimalist plane, right? I mean, what would be the difference between this and an illuminated fixture? I mean, it is a light box. There's nothing else there. We may not be regulating the amount of foot candles that emerge from the hi-hats, but in essence, that's kind of what it is. And the other thing that I continue to be concerned with is that, and which I appreciate the applicants having mentioned, is the sun shading. Right? This building, I'll betcha, is more black than clear. I mean, look, the people who live there are people of means, and they probably have other residences and other places to go, and probably won't be here 365 days a year. And they may be here quite a few days less than 365. And for all those days when they're not here, and for the days when they're here and it's sunny out, it's going to be a black shrouded box or a dark gray shrouded box. It won't be what we see. It'll be very, very different. And the fact that is a movable temporary thing is of note. But I think that it's worth our consideration that for significant periods of time, this will not be a glass box, but will be a fabric wrapped box. All that said, I do think it's appropriate. I think the changes that they made were effective in reducing its scale, but I think it raises some very, very interesting issues that I'll bet you we'll see again.
Okay, thank you. I think in some ways we do also even with rear yard additions, when we look at very glassy rear yard additions and the scale of the glass.
And I was thinking about that. The difference between that and this is that those windows occur in a context almost always of scale and architecture, right? There's mitigating elements. It's mullions. It's an enframement of brick. It's a balcony rail. If there's something else, it's kind of in a context. This, because it's so minimal, there's nothing left. There's a white plane, a black edge, and a glow. That's it. And it's kind of like a Tyrrell. It's minimalism. It makes it feel scaleless. It's just interesting.
It's interesting, and I think it will be interesting to, should it be approved today, to see it in person and how it actually expresses itself. And I think that will contribute to our continued conversations. All right, Commissioner Chen, you also last time expressed concerns about the visibility of the 18th floor specifically, and asked that they reduce that. And so, how are you feeling today?
I think they have made a dramatic improvement, and I agree with Commissioner Goldblum. This is a fascinating topic, and I think that the applicant has done an excellent job. And I've always admired the work of this great architect, so this is appropriate.
Thank you. Commissioner Lutfi? I think you had sort of overall height concerns as well as the finish.
Yeah. Well, I guess 3's a charm. And I really want to thank the applicant for going back and, a couple of times and seriously considering everything that we brought up, and then addressing it in a way that creates, I think, a very special addition on this building. As other commissioners have said, first of all, I think they've done some very smart things. The 17th, the first floor is now greatly approximates the size of what is here. But it disappears because of the glass and because they've made the top of it so thin. So as Commissioner Jefferson and Commissioner Goldblum said, it now seems like it floats a little bit. It's very interesting and attractive and not very visible piece of work here. I also think that the moves that they made above on the 18th floor from a materiality and color standpoint, and not having any visibility, were terrific. And the work on making the glass non-reflective and the use of the shades, it all works to make a very successful, greatly improved project. And I want to again thank the applicant for their hard work, and I can absolutely approve this. And it's always a pleasure to approve a project that is a new addition that's going to have a positive impact on our architectural landscape and will not detract in any way.
Thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith, I think you had similar concerns, particularly about the 18th floor and the color and the finish.
Yes, I think that was my major concern. So I'm pleased that they were able to reduce the size of the 18th floor to utilitarian size and make it non-visible. And again, the color of the ceiling should help to reduce any kind of glare that's coming off the light fixtures. But I think that their efforts towards shading the glass is commendable. And I also appreciate the fact that they're working with Cornell on efforts to avoid bird strikes on this building, because it could be highly attractive to birds. So I think that's a great improvement, and I can find it appropriate.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Gustafson, I think you last time were more concerned about the visibility and felt that I think a more significant reduction needed to happen on all sides. So I'm not sure how you're feeling today with the changes to the 18th floor and the finish of the ceiling and the framing.
Well, I certainly appreciate the efforts that the applicant made. It doesn't change my position. I think I had highlighted last time and the previous time, and I don't have to go into great detail on it, that I disagree with this notion that this is one of the languages that appears on rooftop additions on the edge of the park. I think even their example is not on the edge of the park, which is to say that it violates the consistency of our aggressive approach to materiality and detail on rooftop additions along the park. To quote Commissioner Jefferson, it will be a beacon of light. And I think Commissioner Goldblum, not to misquote him, said it is like a lighting fixture, and indeed it is like an enormous lighting fixture. I can't find it appropriate, but I do appreciate how much has gone into this, how much effort has gone into this.
Thank you. And Commissioner Bland, you weren't here last time. I think you were here though for the initial hearing, and you've seen today the changes from that initial hearing to where we are today. So do you have thoughts about the design as it's evolved?
Do I ever? Yes, I do. And I want to just step back, not prolong this long conversation, which has been very articulate. I've loved listening to my fellow commissioners and their thoughts. But I want to just position myself too in saying that ever since I moved to New York City over 50 years ago now, I have been transfixed by one of the great aspects of architecture, which are the penthouses that exist on so many buildings here. Penthouses exist on other buildings in other cities too, but not with the prevalence that they do in New York. My eyes are always cast up, wondering who lives up there in the clouds and how do they live, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, and soon after I moved here, I discovered Hugh Ferris's great, I think it was 1928 book called The Metropolis of Tomorrow, when looking up at these apocryphal and penthouses in many cases never built, but just makes the whole realm of penthouses so exciting for me and so New York. So with that said, I think I could have supported, I'm a little sorry to see it getting so invisible. Yes, it will be a beacon of light, and I think that's not a bad thing here. I could have supported a second story as well in this case. But I admire the flexibility of one of the world's great architects in listening to 11 commissioners in New York describe what they think is an appropriate approach, and I certainly respect that. If there is a masterclass to be given in how to add in a contemporary way, new to old, I would say it would be Norman Foster. Starting with the British Museum, with the Portrait Gallery in DC, and so many other places. So I think this is a master piece of architecture, which I gather now we will be approving, to rest on top of an old and rather plain building, but with great, in my judgment, a great flair, which will add great presence to this part of Central Park West and this part of our city. So I'm thrilled actually by seeing it today. And I think the improvements, even though I could have improved something a little bit higher, the improvements that have been made by making it lower, by making it less black, are in the right direction. And I certainly applaud the bird strike issue, which I think is close to my heart, as well as most architects these days. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we have a consensus to approve today. And I want to thank the applicants for really listening to the commissioner's comments and being very thoughtful in your responses and bringing us to this addition today that I think will fit very appropriately in terms of its size. And I think it will have a beautiful design, and yet with the changes that are made, it will also be somewhat recessive and neutral. And I think it will be really interesting to see it when it is fully constructed and to think about our discussion and how it fully manifested. So thank you again for all of your hard work. And Commissioner Jefferson, would you make a motion?
Sure. In the matter of LPC-22-00550, 616 West Side, Central Park, West Historic District. Application is to construct a rooftop addition. I note that the building style, scale, material, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historical character of the Upper West Side, Central Park West Historic District. I recommend approval finding, I recommend approval that replacing the existing altered penthouse will not eliminate or damage any significant architectural features, that the historic building was originally constructed with a pair of sizable and visible penthouse with rooftop bulkheads and other accretions, and therefore maintain a sizable visible penthouse at this building will be consistent with the historic massing of the building and its roofscape, that the overall height of the penthouse would be in keeping with the variety of conditions found at the roof of buildings of this size within the historic district, including some multi-story historic penthouse and other modern additions with bulkheads, water tanks, and other utilitarian accretions on their roofs. That when viewed from nearby street, the 18th floor of the penthouse will not be visible, and the 17th floor will only be seen from an incidental view over a secondary facade and in views from a limited portion of Central Park West within the context of taller existing water towers and other rooftop accretions. That in the view from Central Park, the penthouse will only be seen at a significant distance as the building in the background of the Central Park West streetscape and within a varied context, including taller buildings, helping the tiered form of the penthouse to remain a subordinate presence within the distinctive Central Park West streetscape silhouette, so as not to call attention to itself. That the 17th floor of the penthouse closely approximates the massing of the existing historical penthouses at this building, will be consistent in size with archetypal penthouses found at apartment buildings of this age and style within this historic district. That the limited size, simple design, and setback placement of the 18th floor will be in keeping with the character of existing utilitarian accretions found at penthouses and buildings throughout the streetscape. That the penthouse setback placement, large expanse of non-reflective glazing, thin framing, and dull gray metal cladding will maintain a sense of lightness and differentiate it from the original masonry structures below, thereby supporting the primacy of the historic masonry building. And that the simple design and non-reflective glazing of the rooftop railing, when seen from public thoroughfares at a distance within the context of the glazed addition, will help them to remain a discreet and harmonious presence.
Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Nay.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 8 in favor and 1 opposed, the motion passes.
That's approved. Thank you. And that concludes our public meeting part of our agenda. And we'll now move to our public hearing portion of our agenda.
All right, we'll start with public hearing item number 1, LPC 22-08392. This is an application for a binding report in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1, Lot 10, Governor's Island, Building 110 in the Governor's Island Historic District. This is a utilitarian Romanesque revival style storehouse built in 1870 to 79. The application is to install signage.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. They now have control of the presentation. You can advance the slides using your arrow keys or your mouse. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Commissioners, thanks very much for your consideration today. My name is Tim Galen. I chair the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council Board. I'm joined by Ann Harakawa, Principal and CEO of 212, our public information design firm. We're here in follow-up to initial meetings held in 2019 with you and Community Board Number 1, as well as subsequent deliberations with CB1 that concluded last November with their unanimous committee and full board level support of the signage program being presented today. CB1's unanimous support was the outcome of months of collaboration among the Landmarks Committee, the Trust, LMCC, and 212, with the outcome of design that we in CB1 think is responsive to all of the comments and concerns expressed by LPC in our 2019 meeting. Anne will present our proposal in detail, but in summary, we've made the following changes in response to your recommendations. 1, all banner signs have been eliminated. 2, informational signs on the east and south elevations have been simplified and consolidated. 3, all signs are more closely aligned with the architecture of the building. For example, the Art Center signage on the east elevation has been centered and carefully located in relation to the pediment and cornice. And the contrast between signs and the fabric of the building have been made more subtle through material selection and detail. 4, the scale hierarchy and material contrast of identity signage on both elevations have been carefully calibrated in relation to the context of existing identity signage on the island. 5, the LMCC sign on the east elevation has been redesigned and relocated to serve more as informational signage than identity signage. 6, the size, positioning, color, letterface, and detailing of the illuminated blade sign that marks the presence of the ground floor cafe program, both during the day and at night, has been comprehensively revised. And finally, 7, all signs have been detailed to facilitate removal without impact to the building fabric. With Anne's presentation, I think you'll find her approach has been informed by relevant precedent in the signing of landmark buildings, especially buildings of comparable cultural and public use, is in balance with other signage already approved and in place on the island, and helps visitors to the island be aware of all of the really wonderful public programs available at the Arts Center, but in a way that is simple, elegant, and empathetic with the historic fabric of the building and its context. On behalf of Lily, slide please. On behalf of Lily Chopra, who's unable to attend today's meeting, I'll make a few additional introductory remarks and speak briefly to the mission and vision of LMCC and the Arts Center. Anne will present the details of our signage program and explain how their design facilitates the key programmatic objectives of the Arts Center. Slide. As a reminder, the Arts Center occupies, other way, please. Yes, thank you. As a reminder, the Arts Center occupies Building 110, part of the northern portion of the historic district, immediately adjacent to Swasson's Landing, the main point of disembarkation for visitors coming to the island from Lower Manhattan. If you've been to the island before, it's the building immediately to the right as you exit the ferry. Slide. Built in 1870 as an ordnance storehouse, Building 110 was one of 7 buildings that originally constituted the New York Arsenal. Slide. The 2-story Romanesque Revival building has a shallow timber frame roof supported by masonry bearing walls with projecting brick pilasters. Of particular note, stucco was applied to the exterior brick by the Army around 1904, later removed during the WPA movement, and more recently reintroduced in 2018 by the Trust with LPC's approval. Slide. In this image, the Arts Center is to the right of Swasson's Landing and its large-scale gantry-mounted gateway signage. Slide. This image and the next show the existing conditions of our south and east facades, the locations of our proposed signage program. Slide. After World War I, the building was used by the Army and then the Coast Guard for office space. In 2010, we, LMCC, opened a studio residency program on 14,000 square feet of the upper floor, together with the Harbor School, the first year-round uses of the island since the Coast Guard. In 2019, we completed a multi-million-dollar renovation of the entire 40,000 square foot interior of Building 110 and launched a more comprehensive approach to serving artists, arts organizations, and their audiences. Renamed the Arts Center at Governor's Island, it's now an essential part of LMCC's year-round incubation and presentation of artists and their work. Slide. And the next slide. LMCC was founded in 1973 with the conviction that artists and communities are interconnected in their contribution to a more just, equitable, and sustainable society. We have a special relationship with downtown for almost 50 years, but as the borough's cultural council, our work extends throughout Manhattan. We're the largest re-grantor of public art. Slide, please. We're the largest re-grantor of public arts funding in New York City, 1.5 million to artists and arts organizations this year alone. Slide. And while our perspective is global, celebrated artists and arts organizations from around the world are among those we support, our mission remains firmly rooted in our local communities. Slide. You may also be familiar with River to River, the downtown summer arts festival we helped found in the aftermath of 9/11 and have exclusively produced and directed for the past 10 years. The celebration of creative diversity presented live in public spaces throughout Lower Manhattan. Slide, and slide again. In 3 short years, the Art Center has become integral to how we serve, connect, and make space for artists in the community. Slide. A place for artists and their audiences to engage in the most challenging issues of our time. Slide. Working with the Trust, our exhibitions, performances, and other public programs are designed to explore island-wide initiatives, including climate change and environmental sustainability. Slide. All of our programs for families and adults alike are free and open to everyone. Slide. We also give public access to artists and their creative process through workshops, open studios, and a range of other educational programs. Finally, our year-round residency program allows artists of all disciplines to research and incubate new work, engage with audiences on an experimental basis, and build the professional skills and networks essential to successful contemporary practice. Slide. The cafe, located at the northeast corner of the ground floor, is linked by an open architectural stair to the main gallery on the second floor above. Using the plan at the bottom of the slide, it's the area located on the upper right, immediately adjacent to the main entrance. The cafe, the adjacent exhibition and education spaces, and the main gallery above constitute the principal public-facing elements of the Art Center. With line of sight to the ferry landing, the cafe is designed to be open throughout the day and into the evening, a place for a coffee and brioche, casual lunch and evening meal, and most importantly, a place to experience the art of performance, be it musical, theatrical, the spoken word, dance, or other multidisciplinary works of art. Last summer, the cafe presented a series of concerts in partnership with Jazz at Lincoln Center. With ferry service now available year-round and increasingly into the evening, the opportunity to bring performance artists and their audiences together is truly boundless. Slide. I can't tell you how delighted we at LMCC have been to work with Ann Harakawa and her 212 team, given how successful they have been in using public information design to shape the civic and commercial landscape of New York over the past 2 decades. Ann?
Thank you, Timur. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's always helpful to understand the context for a signage discussion. So I appreciate the depth that you went into, because the signage, we feel that signage really connects place with people. I'm Ann Harakawa from 212, and I'm really pleased to be able to present in detail our signage design proposal this morning. We feel positive and confident that this proposal is strong, well considered, and properly vetted. Next. So we went through quite a thorough and exhaustive process, and our process started with an understanding of the context of the island, like Timur just introduced to you, and some of the existing conditions. So this led us to the design criteria for our signage, attracting visitors to the building, identifying entrances, provide information on activities and offerings, enhance the historic architectural context, and comply with code requirements. Next. So let me acquaint you with some of the visual references that we used. At the ferry entrance, we were greeted by these 2 large historic gantries, which welcome visitors to Governor's Island at a scale and visibility that can be seen from quite a distance. Next. The welcome scale and visibility color continues as we enter and begin to experience the island. Next. Here are a couple of precedents of existing signage. The 2 on the left are on the island. And the other one is just another example of illuminated signs that have been approved by the landmarks. So the one on the right is BAM in Brooklyn, and the other are on Governor's Island. So you can see they're both kind of blade signs with internal illumination. Next. We looked at other precedents and the level of illumination in combination with scale and lighting methods to understand the best possible solution for our needs on our building, which is much smaller in scale than this. We other landmark historic districts nearby informed our approach also to building mounted methods, visibility, and again, scale, letter forms. We were looking at all these things around just to make sure that we understood carefully the kind of requirements of our signage. Next. Here's two examples of scale. And the one on the right, the Old Vic, was one that we really thought was relevant in terms of our proposal. The letter forms are large, painted on the surface of the building with low contrast. I think what we're looking at is actually even lower contrast. But there, Mass Mocha and the Walker also uses scale in order to attract visitors to the site as well as to the entrances. Next. So we have two facades where signage is needed on the building, the south and east facades. Because this side of the building is long, it is important for us to identify the main entrance from a distance. This is a south elevation. Next. Our design intent was simple and elegant. We paid close attention to placement, scale, contrast, and letter forms. Functionally, we have created 3 levels of hierarchy of information at this entrance. The very low contrast large letter forms, which identify the Art Center on the building facade. Number 2 is the LMCC identifier and address to the right of the entrance. And then ADA accessible code required information, which you can see through the fence. This is a technical drawing with measurements of the previous rendering. Each piece of information has been vetted for scale and legibility, and you can see we are using panels to mount into the building surface, painted panels that match the color of the facade, to minimize the penetrations into the building. I'll go into more detail with each one of these sign types. So the tinted stucco letters, these are large scale letter forms that are stencil painted with a natural mineral silicate paint. The product we've specified is manufactured specifically for historic stucco facades with an appropriate range of subtle colors, and frequently part of restorations that are guided by the U.S. Secretary of Interior's guidelines for historic restoration. Great, thanks. And then the building ID and address plaque is mounted onto a painted panel, colored to match the facade with dimensional letters. The plaque will reduce the number of penetrations into the building facade for mounting, and the dimensional and mounting details are included in this drawing. You can see on the right, there's a section showing the number of penetrations. And then 80 accessible code required signs are also needed at this entrance. Again, we've used it as a painted panel to reduce the number of penetrations. Next, thank you. So this is the east facade, and this is the only other side of the building we feel requires signage. This is the existing conditions on a beautiful sunny day, which is the best visibility conditions. We anticipate most visitors will be coming from this direction as they're coming off the ferry. This rendering shows the same hierarchy of information on this elevation that the other one. With the addition of the Arts Center signage at Governor's Island spelt out above the windows for optimal visibility, and also the addition of a cafe sign at the corner of the building. I just want to mention that we took great care in terms of the choice of typeface. I think we love being able to look at typefaces at this scale and understanding the kind of beautiful curves, as well as the legibility and how that translates into these kind of physical forms. Next. So here's the technical drawing of this elevation. So you can see the Art Center very subtly on the facade. Coming forward are the letter forms, the Art Center at Governor's Island, and then at much more of a pedestrian scale, at the entrance, it helps to reemphasize that this is the entrance to the building, the LMCC identifier, and then the cafe sign, which is particularly important to us in terms of making sure that visitors understand there's a cafe there. Next. So again, going through the details of this is the same stucco that were specified on the other side of the building here on this side. Next. These are the building ID channel letters, the scale of the letters, the thickness, and how they're meant to be. They're actually mounted on a raceway, again, to minimize the penetration into the building surface. And I thought it might be helpful for us to just see the scale, the relative scale of what we're proposing in relationship to some of the existing signage on Governor's Island. So the top is the big giant gantries that I showed you earlier, and you can see that the letter forms on the facade, painted letter forms, are smaller and also much less contrasty. And then the next two on the bottom, the Governor's Island at the entry, and our proposed signs for the facade, and then the channel letters, the relationship to those. Next. And then continuing on the door entrance signs, again, here we use the painted panels with pin mounted letter forms to reduce the penetrations. So you can see we've designed a kind of system for consistency at the entrances, as well as kind of simplifying the methods. The same goes for the ADA required sign. It's the same scale, same sort of sign type as the other entrance. Next. So we're excited to be able to have a cafe as an offering for our visitors, especially to encourage evening activities. So we have really kind of labored over the design of this cafe ID sign in order to balance kind of the historic relevance with the modern functionality. Our solution is to use a non-intrusive illuminated sign. So you can see there's the letter forms are quite thin in relationship to the sign panel. So the the illumination is very kind of subtle, but I think it's based on our experience, it's really enough to kind of attract people to the building and help them understand what's available inside. Next. So I love this kind of evening shot because you can start to see the life in the building, the kind of activity that we were trying to draw people to in the evening, and the cafe sign right there, that just has a little bit of a sparkle. It's not meant to be overwhelming by any means, but helping people understand that they can come in and really enjoy all the different activities that this building has to offer. Next. So in summary, we have sort of carefully and thoughtfully designed the signage with an elegant and simple solution in mind that meets the LPC criteria while still functioning well for the LMCC. And as Timur had mentioned earlier, we had eliminated the banner signs. We've really tried to minimize the penetrations into the building. We've chosen materials carefully in terms of their appropriateness to and respect for the building and its history. We're using subtle contrast for large scale letter forms, and everything is removable and reversible. So thank you very much. That sort of concludes my presentation, and let me know if you have any questions.
All right, great. Thank you. We do, I think, have some questions, so we'll go ahead with those, starting with Commissioner Goldblum, followed by Commissioner Jefferson. So Commissioner Goldblum, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you go back to the east elevation view? Either elevation or rendering, doesn't matter. Whoever's got control, there you go. Thanks. That's fine. So my questions are about the black metal letters over the, at the bottom of the pediment. Here on this facade, you kind of added that larger level of text over what you did on the side facade, where you don't have that larger kind of text. Tell me a little bit about why it is, if you have the super graphics, why do you think that this level is necessary? Why is it this big, and why is it where it is? And why is let's start with that.
Sure. We are thinking about the distance from, first of all, inviting people into the building, making sure they understand that this is an art center, particularly as you're getting off the ferry. So that getting off the ferry is actually quite a distance. We really wanted to set up that kind of hierarchy of information. So that kind of entices the people to come to kind of walk in this direction and understand what the offerings are in the building as you get closer. So, and we also thought it was a really nice kind of set of tools in terms of information tools that worked really well with the architectural facade.
Specifically the size of the letters and the placement at the bottom edge as opposed to centered. What's behind those you're thinking there?
Centered in
centered on that horizontal band that is raised versus you have it actually resting on the lower edge of that horizontal band.
I guess
the stucco that runs the words Governor's Island sit on a piece of stucco that's on top of vertical pieces of stucco that project out. It's a horizontal piece of stucco that projects out. You with me?
I'm not with you. I'm sorry. Are you talking about the darker letter forms that are on a raceway?
Yes, that's what he's talking about.
This line here. See it?
Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Right. So you chose to place the letters not in the center of that band of stucco, but at the bottom of it. Why?
From our standpoint, it's just a comfort with having a baseline. Reading from a baseline as opposed to sort of just centered in the middle. It was just, that's our comfort in terms of this particular situation. Also, the raceway is located in a particular place on the building so that it's easy to mount and less kind of visibly intrusive.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson.
Yeah. Commissioner Goldblum asked the questions I was asking, and I knew this was a deliberate design move, but thank you for the answer. I have another question. On the other facade, the entry on the side, I don't know what page it is, 38 perhaps, I'm not sure. The one by the subordinate entrance that you have. Keep going, this one, no, keep going, the other one, keep going. It's at the beginning when you started. Keep going. It's the architectural rendering that you had.
I think it's the south, he's talking about south elevation entrance.
Apologies, my computer is being very slow and finicky.
That one. The issue here is it's a symmetry.
There it is.
And I know design moves have changed. Why not make the sign symmetrical on both sides? Why just one side? Is that just?
Are you talking about the sign panels at the right side of the door?
Yeah, why not put one on the left-hand side, just to keep the symmetry?
Yeah, I think that in this particular case, we didn't necessarily feel that we needed both of those signs. I think we were, we felt that we only needed one. And we were thinking about the surface of the building as well.
That's true. But in terms of the architecture, you just need one functionally. But in terms of the architecture, perhaps two would work with symmetry, but perhaps not. Just a question.
Yeah.
Just a thought. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? All right, I don't see other questions at this time, so we'll move to public testimony. We may have questions after that. So if you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. As always, we'll start with anyone who signed up in advance and then do everyone else, but please raise your hand whether or not you signed up in advance so we can find you. And I will turn it over to Sasha Seeley to take us through the testimony.
Thank you. Christina Conroy from Victorian Society, New York. You should be receiving a request from me now. Okay, Christina, I see you've accepted my request. Please just unmute your mic and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning, commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now founded in New York City in 1966, the Victorian Society in America is dedicated to fostering the appreciation and preservation of our 19th and early 20th century heritage. The New York chapter promotes presentation of our historic districts, individual landmarks, interiors, and civic art. Now, we are glad this brick 1870s ordnance storeroom, which is visible as one arrives and departs on the ferry, has been renovated. However, we oppose the use of the proposed lettering and the excessive amount of signage for the east and south elevations. Now, signage necessarily communicates present-day function, but it should not distract from the overall character of the building. The proposed 2-foot-tall letters calling out the building name do that here. The baseline of the letters sits along the line of the insert window bays, and this fights with the simple utilitarian style of the building. The sign would be less than half as long if the words "at Governor's Island" were eliminated. Now, is it necessary to remind people that they are on Governor's Island? How the wording appears in this horizontal space should be evaluated and refined. Also, we question the graphic gimmickry of the large painted letters filling the pediment above that sign on the 3 bays of the south elevation. Although appearing to be subtle, if the letters are bold enough to be read, they are too bold, turning the building into a signboard. Now, almost all signs are reversible, but reversibility does not make these signs appropriate. We recommend that the overall signage program for this historic building be reduced and simplified. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Arbalou from Historic District Council. You should be receiving a request from me now. All right, Michelle, I see you've accepted my request. Please just unmute your mic and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Michelle Arbalou for the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds this proposal to be generally appropriate and also reversible. We are not convinced by the super graphics and the tinted stucco. To us, it seems visually weak to be worth the effort and such ends up as a throwaway idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just take a glance back over and see if we have anyone else who wishes to speak on this item. And I do not see any more hands raised, so I will just note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 1 recommends approval of this application, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Okay, so I'd like to turn to the applicant team and ask if you would like to respond to the comments that you've heard on the amount and size of the signage and its relationship to the building. Ms. Harakara, do you want to?
Timur, would you like to comment?
I think I would only note that the signage in its hierarchy is identity and then informational, and the important public reuse of and programmatic reuse of this 40,000 square foot former ammunition warehouse, that it is marked as having a new identity, which welcomes the public to all of these programmatic undertakings. And again, free and open to everyone, is an important augmentation, if you will, of the identity of the building. We've in working with 212 tried to do that in a way that is simple and elegant and empathetic with the historic fabric, but it is 40,000 square feet of public and artistic programs, not 40,000 square feet of ammunition storage. And so we think that's important. The east elevation is more of the, has a stronger sense of conveying the identity of the building and the program within it. Hence the signage being somewhat more in scale with the east elevation, but also in scale with the point of arrival at Swasson's Landing. The name of the program is the Art Center at Governor's Island, and it is visible by line of sight and legible as you exit the ferry. That seems important. But beyond that, this is as simple as we think we can be, and at the same time make the public aware of all of the richness that's inside and waiting for them.
Okay, thank you. All right, commissioners, any final questions? All right, I am sending you all requests to unmute so that we can close the hearing and begin our discussion. And Commissioner Lutfi, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Gustafson, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And, you know, I want to say, as someone who's been involved with Governor's Island from the very beginning, when it was, when the Coast Guard left and it was turned over to the state and subsequently the city and all under the Trust for Governor's Island, you know, I am very supportive of the uses that are on this island, using the historic buildings, many of them haven't had uses for a long time. And so the idea of activating the historic buildings in a way that attracts visitors and creates cultural center, I think is really important to the vibrancy of this historic district and the long-term preservation of these buildings. And so I think this cultural arts center is an important part of that and activation of the island and historic buildings. And, I would say that this building is a little unique on the island. It has stucco, which the commission approved. So its brick is not visible. So it already has a sort of beige finish that's not brick-like. And I would say this building is short, but quite long. And most of the building is actually not going to get signage here. The signs are really focused on, the one critical facade and the main entrance. And so, and even there, I think the letters are open like, and even the super graphics are subtle in their tone on an already, sort of beige finished surface. As was stated, the original proposal did include a significantly larger amount of signs, and I appreciate that that they're not proposing banners, which is usually the go-to for a cultural arts center. So I think, I do think that these are subtle and open-like on a relatively long building, and I think supportive of the uses and the activation of the island. So let's just sort of my opinion to kick it off, but let's go around. Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you like to go? Oh, and before we start, I do want to note for the record that Commissioner Devonshire is recused on this item and has not been present for the entire meeting and will not be present for the discussion. Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you go ahead?
Sure. I, like you, am very enthusiastic about all the uses and sort of innovative programs and participatory, intention of the way that the island has been conceived and is imagining its future. So I'm really in support of the adaptive reuse, the various reuse thinking and rethinking of these buildings. I do think that I very much appreciate the presentation that was made about the signage, because I think that the signage has been conceived with with a kind of a light touch and with a sensitivity to the kind of the old and the new, the needs of wayfinding, but at the same time, kind of not wanting to be too institutional. And the presentation was really sensitive in this sense. My take on the signage is that I find that actually the lime wash super graphics are really interesting, and I think it's a very appropriate approach to these buildings. And it's interesting to see the Old Vic as an example. And it has something to do, the appropriateness I find has something to do with the super graphic being kind of referring to the kind of the scale of the building, something about the size and the scale of the building, but not in competition with its mass or with its materiality. It's a very subtle thing, and I don't know that I can articulate why I think it's especially interesting, but I find it to be very appropriate. I also think that their interpretation of the applied smaller signs, the LMCC, blue and black. I think those are the two colors. I'm not sure if it's that's black or it's dark brown or dark blue. But anyway, that contrast is very sort of pragmatic, utilitarian, but also and direct, but also has a kind of a real design quality about it, but not like super duper design. I also really think that there's a lot of interest in the corner, the wrap corner with that slight illumination, the script font, interesting. And it kind of, again, it hugs the building, it reinforces the building, it doesn't compete with the building. And unlike blade signs, it doesn't have that kind of retail feeling about it. So I'm in support of that. The only thing that I'm not convinced about yet are these aluminum, attached separate letters, both their location with respect to the pediment, and it just in general. I think that if the super graphics are used and the smaller graphics, both on the corners as well as on the close to the entry activity and the doors, I feel like that could be sufficient and does not need the sort of more conventional aluminum letters kind of propped up on the building. It just doesn't feel necessary, and I don't know that it provides much more than again, there's a lot of wayfinding. It also departs from the graphics of the letters used for Governor's Island, which I don't know the font typology of, and so I don't know that that's a great thing to do. So that's the only piece that I'm not convinced about and don't think is right. But otherwise, I'm very much in support of the way they've approached the project.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holford-Smith.
Yes, thank you. I actually find this application to be approvable as is. I think it's all appropriate. I agree with almost all of the comments of Commissioner Schmier-Barron, but I also find that these aluminum letters are appropriate. I think given the scale of this building, the large scale of the building and the general lack of detail to the facade, that these letters, I don't feel compete with the architecture. And I think having them sit on that bottom line rather than centered on that stucco band is actually a more modern, interesting approach. And I think I'm actually okay with the application as is.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, I agree with the comments of Commissioner Barron and also of Commissioner Holford-Smith, because I do think that I agree with in general that I think it's excellent in terms of all of this drilling. And I think that the letters, the large letters are very important in this case because, as we've all been to Governor's Island, it's a huge place. It's very easy to wander around aimlessly trying to find where you want to go. And I think that the wash letters may not be, with the foliage and so forth, may not be so evident in certain aspects. So I think this is really quite important in terms of wayfinding, which is necessary for this site. For a couple seconds after one of the some of the testimony said, why at Governor's Island? I hesitated too. But then I thought, as the applicant said, it's part of the name. And if you were looking for the Staten Island Arts Center, it would say Staten Island Arts Center, even though you were on Staten Island. So I think this is very approvable as presented.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Thank you. I also want to congratulate the applicant. I think it's a really thoughtful, much better than the one we saw before, much more appropriate to the island and to the building. And I'm kind of in Adi's camp, I think. I think that the super graphics are an appropriate way to identify the building's use. I think they could push it a little bit on the contrast even. I think it could be a little bit darker or, not very dark, but I think that it might get lost. You don't want it to feel like it's a mistake. But I think it's an appropriate way to identify a historic building that kind of works with the architecture and kind of celebrates it. I think that the small signage and the corner signage are also totally appropriate. My concern with the aluminum letters is that they're meant to be a more modern, non-classical gesture, but their placement at the center, left to right, and at the pediment where signage normally would be on a traditional building makes the fact that they slip down to the header seem like a mistake to me. It doesn't feel like it belongs to the building. It doesn't feel like it's trying to pull away from the building. So I think that if they wanted to do those letters, I would be okay with them having those letters, but I think they should be about a third smaller. And they can work with the staff as to whether they fight the architecture hugging that bottom line or whether they should be centered. But I think in general, this is a very high quality presentation. It's interesting about the graphic identity of Roosevelt, of Governor's Island. It's very strong. I mean, from the gantries to the Welcome Center and throughout the developed portions of the island. I think it's Pentagram that did it. I forget, we saw it a few years ago, but it's remarkably strong, and it really creates a very intense identity to the island. And it puts these guys in a tough spot because they want to be separate from that. They're purposely not using that very charismatic font and style that the entry uses. So it really needs to distinguish itself. And part of my concern about the size of these letters is that they seem to share the scale of the Welcome Center graphics, and therefore might again look like why did they go for that font? I think it needs to be a little bit different.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, it's just like Chair Carol and the rest of the commissioners, we're so delighted that the island has come alive. Now it's a 24, full-time use rather than off-peak season. And I think we are in agreement that, there's a couple of approaches, as Michael Goldblum just alluded to, and some of the earlier commissioners' comments. I think they are trying to, the applicant, first of all, the applicant is doing an excellent job in taking this serious approach. The question becomes whether, like Michael Goldblum mentioned about whether you use the same typeface as the very dominant, when you get off the gantry type of governance islands, whether it's pentagram typeface or not. And obviously the sense is the applicant chose to make this stand apart. And I think that I'm fine with the majority of the proposals. I think I do agree with some of the commissioner's suggestion that at least for this building on the front facade, if the commissioners agreed that the size of the lettering could be smaller. But other than that, I think this is an excellent application. And then whether you want to do centering or not, I think that I leave it to the commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bland.
I think everything about this is elegant, simple, and appropriate, including and especially the location, this different from a couple of people who've already spoken, of the aluminum letters. I think they're the right scale, and I think they are placed right too at the header. Now, if you'll stretch your imagination a bit, I started looking at this and thinking, aha, 6, not 8 columns, a flatter roof, but is this the Pantheon? And then the Pantheon has letters, I would say, M. Agrippa, as we all know, starts talking about how the Pantheon and when it was built, about the same size of letters. So I think something that was built about 50 BC with letters about the same size as this is a reasonable approach. So I'm looking at it like that. And I think but before I even use that approach, I think it's elegant in its own right.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi.
Yeah, I happen to agree with a lot of what's been said here. I think overall, this is a very understated and elegant solution. And I think the way the layering works emphasizes that. But this signage has to do a job here. And the job is to identify this building. And there's only signage in this one location. So I think what the applicant's doing is they're being very respectful of the building and respectful of not trying to scream what scream out the name of it. But at the same time, they're making sure that people are going to understand that this is a facility with an important use, and this is the way it identifies it and it welcomes you to come in. Now, I happen to think that while the pentagram signage is fantastic, it is the signage for the island as a whole. And if we're talking about hierarchies, the next hierarchy down would be the signage for a building. It doesn't have to be the same type, doesn't have to be the same font, because now we're dealing with something else. I feel like the metal letters are critical in terms of signage, and I think the placement makes a lot of sense. And the raceways looks almost invisible, and I think that's in part because of how the applicant is applying it. I also think that I love the tinted stucco. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think someone else, it might have been Commissioner Goldblum, said that, it might actually be, in its understated way, just a little too understated. And I don't think it should look like it's been there forever and is maybe starting to fade. I would recommend that the applicant work with staff on this so that they can sort of tweak the tone so that it has a presence. It doesn't compete, but it's not too recessive, because it does play an important role. And from a design standpoint, I think it works extremely well. I also feel that the panel on the right side of the door is another, they've done a good job with this, painting the background so that the color matches the building color, applying it in a way and applying everything in a way so that it's reversible. I mean, I really want to applaud the applicant for taking the time to think about this. We're always talking about this stuff. And so, I feel like the applicant has covered all aspects of reversibility and minimizing the penetrations. I also, the accessibility signage is terrific, and I happen to agree that this restaurant signage is it's perfectly done. It does its job. It's understated. It has a wonderful glow to it, but it doesn't scream. So I wholeheartedly support this, and I also want to say I echo the enthusiasm about everything that's been going on at Governor's Island, and I think LMCC's work has been extraordinary.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson.
An amazing facility for artists, amazing. And it's interesting for me personally, because my initial response on looking at this facade was saying, why did they not center it? And then I realized that artists always have a twist. They always shift things slightly to make one think about things. And lowering the aluminum letters to where they are is that twist that I suddenly realized, it was something it's something important in doing that twist. I think this is an excellent proposal. I think the cafe signs are wonderful with building signs. I think it's excellent. I can approve this.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Bland's comments. I think this is appropriate just the way it is.
Okay, so I think we have actually enough to approve it as is. I think we can ask them to voluntarily explore the size and location of the band and the final finish sample of the super graphic with staff. But I think I think we have enough to approve it as is. So I'm going to go ahead and make that motion and we'll do the vote and see if I've done that right. Okay, in the matter of docket number LPC 22-08392, Governor's Island, Building 110, Governor's Island Historic District, a utilitarian Romanesque revival style storehouse built in 1870 to 79. This is an application to install signage. And I note that the commission previously approved the stucco on the facade on January 19th, 2018, under Commission Binding Report 19-19430, and that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Governor's Island Historic District. And I recommend approval, finding that the proposed signage installation will not damage or obscure any significant historic fabric, that because Governor's Island is not a typical urban streetscape with commercial avenues and common indices of building function and use, there is a greater need for signage to communicate to cultural arts function and use of the building to the public. That the large scale of the building can support the presence of multiple signs of varying types and sizes, that the proposed pin-mounted signage underneath the pediment is well scaled to the building and will be located within an unembellished frieze that serves as a sign band, that the proposed entry and cafe signage panels with dimensional letters at the east and south facades featuring beige aluminum panels and blue or black metal letters relate well to each entrance and harmonize with the existing coating at the facades, that the proposed super graphics will be applied in a lime wash on the stucco facade, and due to the low contrasting color with the underlying facade, it will have a relatively subtle presence, and that the work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the building or the Governor's Island Historic District. And should the applicant wish to continue to explore the size and placement of the metal letters, they may do so in consultation with the staff, who can also review final paint samples for the super graphics. Okay, Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right. And Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 10 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
That's approved. Thank you. And we'll move to the next item.
Next item is public hearing item number 2, LPC 22-08334, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 554, Lot 1, 770 Broadway in the NoHo Historic District. This is a Renaissance Revival style department store building designed by D.H. Burnham and Company and built in 1903 to 07 with an addition built in 1924 to 25. And the application is to install signage and mechanical equipment.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. They now have control of the screen, so the applicant team may begin. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Kenneth Gruskin. I'm a principal of Gruskin Group, and I'll be representing the Wegmans team today. So, all right. So I know you're familiar with this building. It's been before you recently for master plan, and matter of fact, Wegmans is here recently as well. Today, we're here to talk about building signage for Wegmans and their rooftop cooling tower and standby generator. These are some existing historical photos of the building. Obviously, you're familiar with it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. So actually, this corner is where we're going to be proposing the cooling tower. The backside at 8th and Lafayette corner and across from Astor Place. These are photos from the 30s. So now this slide basically focuses you, since it's such a large building, on where we're actually going to be proposing work. So we have these locations up on the roof where we're talking about the cooling tower and the standby generator. And then on the street level, we've got our proposed signage along Lafayette and East 9th and East 8th. And we'll go into more detail about that. Existing current photos of the building. All right, so let me start with kind of the ground floor, because it kind of sets a little bit of the story here for Wegmans. First of all, they're taking about 92,000 square foot of space on grade level as well as the lower level. Additionally, they're actually taking 10% approximately more space than Kmart had there previously. They're anticipating serving a market area about a mile and a half in the Manhattan area. And you know, when you think about what we're going to talk about when we get to the infrastructure of the cooling tower and generator, certainly size is part of it. You know, being 92,000 square foot will make them, if not the largest, among the largest supermarket grocery stores in the city. The closest one being Whole Foods up at Bowery in Houston, which is about 70,000 square feet. So we're going to start with talking about the signage. But before I get there, I just want to say that the wall signs we've worked with staff and we appreciate all their input. We've worked with them really to meet the staff level review criteria. The only reason it's here today is because of their larger size, because of the larger building and the larger tenant space that Wegmans is taking. So that's why that's here today. Wegmans has tried to work to be sensitive and acknowledge the historical nature of this building. In fact, they've altered their standard sign package. If you've been to a Wegmans someplace else, it's usually a red channel letter. And in here, they're going to a halo lit sign, which we know Landmarks prefers. And the letters themselves are in this gold anodized finish, which is more historic and fitting with the building. And the green matches the previously approved colors of the window mullion systems that have been approved previously by Landmarks. So it's all meant to kind of fit in to this environment. These areas here show where the signage is being proposed that we're going to go through. So now as we're looking at these elevations real quick, there's two types of signs on the building. There's the type 1, which are on the corners, and the type 2, which they call the fork, plate, and goblet, which is over the entrance. In terms of lighting, the signs are typically lit 1 hour before and after store hours, and the store hours are anticipated to be approximately 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. All the signage and everything we're showing you today complies with, you know, all zoning related requirements. It's well under that. Obviously, it's subject to LPC approval. So when we get to here, this is a type 1 sign. It's designed to scale and fit into this little clear story area. Here, the green is the backer that we're using a halo light, and you have the brushed gold letters. We'll get to the next detail. And what this is it's showing the sectional detail of how it applies. It's supported by the mullions, and basically all the mounting attachments, wires are all concealed. So it's a very clean installation and designed to kind of scale and fit into that space. This is the type 2 sign. This is the fork, plate, and goblet. Again, same as the other in terms of lighting and finishes. Again, this is sized to fit into this kind of center zone and kind of mark the entrance way. You'll see in this next sign detail, this has, again, all the hidden supports and attachments, wiring, etc., except there's one attachment bar that comes across, which is in the same green finish. That needed to be there because the wind loads wouldn't allow it to be just supported on this mullion at the bottom. This is a view of the backside, and we're just showing you this to show that the Wegmans team has put thought into maintaining the integrity of the sign and also preventing bugs, bees, birds from nesting in the back or even between the back of it and the glass with this bird blocker and such. So trying to keep the sign clean and keep all that other debris and stuff off the people in the building. This is a rendering of the type 1 and type 2 signs in day and nighttime. The illumination is going to be a soft gold glow that will kind of match the articulation of this lettering that we see in the day. These are some precedents that has been before LPC and approved. Trader Joe's, which is a pretty big sign that covers over some of the mullions, Michael's, and those are renderings, and then the New York Sports Club. So this is a corner rendering showing the new window system with the proposed type 1 sign and then the type 2 sign over the entry. This is the opposite corner on Lafayette and East 9th, again showing the two type 1 signs. So now we're going to talk about the promotional signage that's being proposed in the windows. Just to point out, those are really just in this corner. You can see if you look at the plan, this is where checkout is. You have self-checkout registers, some manned checkout registers along the windows. And so the signage we're proposing has numerous functions, including visual security, which we'll talk a little bit more as we move along here. So this is an elevation that shows where these promotional graphics are going. Again, while it just from a computer zoning perspective, not LPC, what's being proposed is less than, of all the signage for Wegmans is less than 40, is about 45% of what technically might be allowed, even when you include this. Also, all the window graphics have a 6-inch space around them. So visually, as you come by or walk by, you can see activity inside, yet they also provide some visual security to people on the inside on the registers and whatnot. Now, key point about these graphics, they are opaque and they cling to the inside of the window. So you do see the plane of glass that's not on the outside where you wouldn't necessarily know if it's not a solid opaque panel. They are full color. And unlike most graphics you would see at like supermarkets where maybe they change weekly with, buy a loaf of bread for X or other specials, these are more storytelling and they change 5 times a year. You can see kind of the schedule. So they're really about communicating values, storytelling, and a little bit about how they do business. These are some examples of what those graphics tend to look like. This would be the center panel, and these would be the flanking panels. This is a photo from another Wegman showing some examples of these on the inside of the glass with the visual space around it. We just put this in as a reference only. This was not required to come to LPC since it's not in an LPC building or zone. And this is the Whole Foods Market that's up by Union Square, and they have full opaque panels on the lower level on the street, which is typical for this kind of retail type. All right, so previously Kmart came before you a while back when they were here to make changes to their signage, and this is, they had proposed essentially, which was approved, was only 3 windows were open. Everything else was either opaque or completely covered with their displays and graphics. And certainly what Wegmans is proposing is significantly less than this, in that we're opening a lot more windows. We've reactivated the clear stories. And while we are putting some opaque signage at the cashier end and kind of Lafayette and East 9th corner, you do have the clear space around them. This was all completely opaque. Some other precedents that LPC approved previously was Blue Man Group signage, and this actually is illuminated. The TD Bank, which is completely frosted, and then you have the Apicha Healthcare Clinic, which has a combination of graphics and film, and then you have the Chalk Preschool, which has a film on the inside. This is a rendering then of the corner on Lafayette and East 9th with the type 1 sign and the proposed window graphics. So with that said, I'm going to move on to kind of the infrastructure up on the roof that's being added, the standby generator and the cooling tower. So the big thing I just want to kind of get across from the get-go is there was almost no real estate left up here to work with. The team looked at every kind of possible option to make sure that whatever could be seen from street level would be minimized. And we can tell you that the standby generator in this corner, the only other corner available was where the cooling tower is. It wouldn't fit here. So even if we wanted to put it there for some reason, it wouldn't have fit. And when it came to the cooling tower itself, which we'll talk about in a minute, we looked very carefully at, could it be rotated? Could it be smaller? Could it be pushed? And it's really optimized where it is now, and we'll kind of go through that. But I just want to emphasize that this blue area is Facebook's current outdoor roof terrace. You have other roof terrace area for the building. Everything in red is already accounted for, and all the gray is basically penthouses and other rooftop items. So we're going to start in this corner over here, and we're going to start talking about the cooling tower. So critical point about this cooling tower is there's a shaft that Kmart used for their cooling tower that runs through the 15 floors of Facebook down to their level. Obviously, if we could have relocated it, even it over here, there's no way to kind of cut a shaft like that through 15 occupied floors of Facebook. So that is certainly a critical component. It's not over designed. We looked at, is the capacity, could it be smaller? Because obviously it is larger than what Kmart need, because the use as a grocery store requires here about 542 nominal tons, whereas Kmart only had 227 nominal tons. So it's practically twice as large. And there's only about a 5 or 10% spare capacity in it. So it's not like we could cut it back by reducing capacity in it. Also, could it be rotated? The only way onto the roof, you have to actually go through the Facebook terrace, and there's a little series of steps here. If it was rotated, it wouldn't have been possible to get to the roof. And the other part is, we believe that as you come down Lafayette from Prince, it would have been much more visible, which you'll see when we get to the renderings. And certainly it would have been on top of the Lafayette along Astor Place. This is a photo of it up here. You can see a screen wall that is for acoustic and some visual privacy for the Facebook crew up here. This is the access ladder to the roof. So this is a comparison of the existing Kmart cooling tower and the proposed Wegmans tower. And this is the screen wall that will be extended basically towards the south to the length of this to complete and maintain the visibility, the privacy to the Facebook area. This is an elevation showing the comparison of height, but what it doesn't tell you, which you'll see we come up, is that even though this is taller than what Kmart had, adjacent to the left is a 27-foot 7-inch high penthouse and a 52-foot high penthouse beyond us here, which you'll see later. Additionally, we even explored, could the dunnage be reduced? Could it be lowered to the roof to reduce height even a little bit? And it's really optimized because you have to maintain clearance to maintain the roof maintenance. Plus you have to have enough size to the dunnage so that it reduces vibration traveling into the building and also maintains safe connections and construction integrity over time.
Mr. Gruskin, we are significantly behind schedule. So if you wouldn't mind focusing on the highlights with the visibility, we can come back to any technical things with questions later.
Okay, well, I think I went too far, hold on. All right, so I'll just jump to the renderings and the photos. So basically, this is the mock-up on the roof here, pretty self-explanatory. When you get to the Astor Place, that corner by Cooper Union, basically, it's still invisible, so you don't even see the cooling tower in this location. As we start moving towards Astor and 3rd, it starts to become visible and you can see the rendering of what it would look like. It's a dull gray to kind of blend in with everything that's up there. As we move towards St. Mark's Place, basically it's the south side where it's only going to be visible to pedestrians. The north side is not visible. Trees really start to block it out and the traffic is heading opposite direction, so it's not even really visible to them as well. As we go to the Cooper Triangle, it is a little more visible here, but you get this 52-foot high penthouse and the 27-foot 7-high penthouse, which blocks, which basically it blends into. Now as we're going to move down Lafayette towards Prince, and you can see at this distance, we're basically at Lafayette and Astor Place, and it's just barely visible. As we start moving again towards Prince, at 425 Lafayette, you start to see a little bit of the cooling tower. Once we start getting down to Lafayette and Bleecker, it completely disappears into all the rooftop kind of equipment, even the trees on the Facebook terrace. Also, if it had been rotated, I think it would become much more apparent on this approach. Finally, at Lafayette and Prince, it blends into the background, pretty much fitting. You can see that 52-foot penthouse and the 27.7 penthouse to the left, so it kind of fits in right there. So real quick about the generator. Again, it's only designed to do 80% capacity, and Wegmans' idea is first to open, last to close, meaning they should be able to operate and support the community at times of emergency or when power outages. This is the rooftop equipment in that corner now, the cooling tower. And the standby generator has been located where it is to provide the proper air clearance to the existing airflow required for the cooling tower. It also has a dull metallic polyester finish to blend into that cooling tower because it basically collapses in view against that. Again, you can see the cooling tower beyond it and the generator. So I'm going to these were the sight lines, but the photos will tell the story. So let's just move ahead. This is the mock-ups up in the roof, and you can see how it kind of collapses against the existing cooling tower. Now, as we start moving along 9th Street, at 35 East 9th Street, you're 608 feet away from the building before you ever start to get a glimpse of it. Traffic is also flowing away from you, so it's not even really noticeable to traffic. When we move further down the street, we're at 30th East 9th Street. Again, at this point, you start to see it, but you can see the other large 52-foot penthouse and the cooling tower and other appendages up there. It fits into that scale. Finally, when we get to University and 9th, really beyond this point, since traffic's going the other way, it's really just about pedestrians on the sidewalk. And at this point, it's well visible. It certainly blends into that rooftop. Just to be thorough, we did look around the other access points, and when you look at East 9th and 3rd Avenue, it's not visible at all. Probably the most visible approach is going to be coming from Union Square along Broadway to the building, but since it collapses against the cooling tower that's up there and the larger tower, when it's in its gray, it's pretty much invisible. And as I kind of go through these, you basically can see as we're moving forward, we're at Broadway and 13th. And now we're at 795 Broadway, about 9th Avenue. At 226 feet back from the building, it disappears. And we also took a quick look at 10th and Broadway. It's not visible from there either. So lastly, there is a slight filtered view at 13th East 8th Street. It's up here in this little corner, but for all practical purposes, it's invisible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we appreciate the commissioners considering Wegman's requests. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, commissioners, do we have any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions at this time, so we'll move right to public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to testify on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you, and I'll turn it over to Sasha Sealy to take us through the testimony.
Thank you. Michelle Arbalou from Historic District Council. You should be receiving a request from me now. Okay, Michelle, please just unmute your mic and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, Michelle Arbalou for the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds the Wegmans sign alone to be appropriate. The other signage in the transom is superfluous and detracts from the building's handsome facade. Similarly, the street-level tenant promotional signage is excessive and unappetizing. We would hope that the view from the street into the neatly arranged rows of businesses would suffice in communicating the store's purposes to residents of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina Conroy from Victorian Society, New York. You should be receiving a request from me now. All right, Christina, please just state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society. The historic photos provided demonstrate that signs on this building have been very minimal throughout its history as Wanamaker's department store and subsequently. We find the proposed signs mounted to the glazed areas above the spandrel glass appropriate in number and scale for this large monumental building. The muted nighttime illumination also seems unobtrusive. However, we strongly oppose the extensive use of window clings. Now, these colorful super graphic advertising panels will overwhelm the ground floor of the building and compromise the goal of transparency for department store show windows. They're scaled for strip malls, not urban sidewalks. There are better ways of obscuring interiors if necessary, including creating interior vitrines filled with actual products offered for sale. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do see that we have one more hand raised. Joe Toms, you should be receiving a request from me. All right, Joe, I see you've accepted my request. Please just unmute your mic and state your name for the record, then you can begin your testimony.
Hi,
I think you've unmuted yourself. Let me see. All right, I think Joe exited the chat because I'm unable to find you again. Let's do one last. All right. Okay, I think I'll have to move on. I'll just add for the record that Manhattan Community Board 2 recommends approval of this application, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Carroll.
All right, thank you very much, Sasha. Okay, I'd like to turn to the applicant and ask if you'd like to respond to the comments that we've heard about this size and the number of and size of the signage and the obscuring the full transparency of those 6 bays at the corner.
Well, let me address the kind of regular signage. I think given the scale of this building and that basically the amount of street frontage, that these signs are proportionally and scaled as well as number that's appropriate, because we're also dealing with, you know, signs on the corners. We just have one on each of the streets on 8th and 9th, and then we just have the couple that define the corners and the one marking the door. I think certainly if this had been a multi-tenant building divided into 2 or 3 tenants, you would certainly end up with much more signage probably than even what Wegmans is proposing. At least it's a very consistent appearance across the corners and along the front of the building, and it's meant to be understated and soft to fit in rather than using their standard colors and style. When it comes to the corner windows, I mean, certainly appreciate the concern. That's why they've tucked it in 6 inches, you know, and maybe there's some way to tuck it in a little bit more to create a little more visibility, but we're also trying to create some visual security for people on the screens. And I can actually tell you that in the past, I had a client, not Wegmans, where people were stealing information off screens, looking through windows, and this is where all the customer checkout in areas is. This is also meant to be more tasteful in this. As I said, it's not a weekly change up of the signs. And lastly, I think when it comes to this kind of store type, it's not a department store, it's a supermarket. And if you probably look at any supermarket, typically around the city or boroughs, they use these type of signage to give them some kind of presence. And to some degree, you know, this is what a supermarket would be in a location kind of like this, but we certainly respect the concern.
Okay, all right. So when you are viewing the building from various points, you're seeing maybe two at the same time at each corner, or perhaps 3 in this case, where you can see the logo over the entry. And I think the commission approved a number of K signs in these same locations throughout the building. I think maybe more of them, correct?
Yes, there was not only their signs, but they also had, every window had either opaque glass or some type of graphics or showcase window. And in this case, unlike a Kmart, which is a department store, which sells basically hard and soft goods, you know, most supermarkets, because of the scale and the type of things they're selling, they don't put, you know, that kind of merchandise in windows like a department store.
Okay.
Just one clarification, many of those, if not all of those Kmart window signs were there at designation and sort of maintained from that point on.
Okay, thanks, Corey. Okay, any final questions, commissioners? All right, I am starting to send you requests to unmute so that we can close the hearing and begin our discussion. So Commissioner Holford Smith, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so this is, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And this is a building that we've seen a number of times. It's in a very large building that's a full block, and we've seen it when we approved signage for Kmart over the years, and then more recently as different tenants have come in, we've approved different entrances and signage for upper floor tenants. So the proposal has a few components. There are the signs in the transoms, there are the window graphics, and then there's the logo above the entry. And finally, there is the new rooftop mechanical equipment, which, as you can see from the roof plan, but also from many of the views, there is a lot of equipment and bulkheads and structures on that roof. So they're limited in location, but also I think in many views, you see it in that context. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Lutfi, would you like to start this one?
Sure. Well, welcome to the neighborhood, Wegmans. I think this is your second location now in the city. The first being in Brooklyn, if I'm not incorrect. I think overall this is a good application. I think the signage works very, very well. It's understated. It's not overly signed, which we generally have with a lot of retail. It follows a lot of the rules that we ask for. I mean, I think it works with the architecture. I think it works really well. I think I'm actually just going to move to the roof for a minute. I think that the applicant has done their best to make the towers as discreet as they possibly can. And I think that visually it's just going to blend in within the landscape, so I can support that. I really can appreciate the issue of security that the applicant mentioned in terms of the windows. I just happen to feel that, and I don't really know what the answer is. I agree about the vitrines. It does, to me, they don't really seem to work for grocery stores, but it just seems like so much signage to me, and it almost takes away from the building a little bit. Maybe some other commissioners have some ideas that might work.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Jefferson.
This was a department store. It's a huge building on a bubble, and it's a matter of degree for me how much signage or sign you have or not have. So when you walk around this, it varies, and I can accept that. The idea that the type 1 sign I can accept, where it's located, the proportion, I can accept all that. Sign 2, I can accept the proportion in relationship to the doors. And I'm uneasy with the promotional signage. But then I think of it as a matter of degree, this huge block, it's okay. But, the amount they have in each bay, can they cut that down? Can they make that less? And I can understand the security issue. I can understand all that. But I'm on the fence here about the amount of signage, and whether if you have a colorful one and the other 2 bays be simpler in value, the amount of color on the corner might become too much. So it's an aesthetic issue which I don't have any real control or opinion of. In terms of the units on the roof, they have to go there. They're visible. They're part of other units on the roof. So I can accept that. So in a whole, I can accept this whole premise. But I think it could be refined much more.
All right, so looking at reducing either the size and or number of the window graphics and perhaps the tonal quality. Okay, Commissioner Gustafson.
Start with the rooftop. There, I think the rooftop accretions are visible, but they're not noticeable. So I think they're appropriate. The applicant used the phrase describing the signage that it's meant to fit into the environment. I think they're right about that when it comes to type 1 and type 2. I think they're wrong when it comes to the vinyl, the promotional vinyl signage. I think it needs to be adjusted for the district. This is NoHo, it's not Times Square, and it's not a suburban location. I don't buy the visual security argument at all. It's incomprehensible to me. And I certainly hope that they are, and they're proud of being better than Kmart.
Okay. Commissioner Shamir Baran.
So I think that the rooftop accretions are appropriate. The signage, the Wegmans type 1 and 2 are fine as well. I don't think there are too many of them. I don't think that the color is wrong or it's redundant to have them on a corner. I think all of that is good. I'm really very much opposed to the vinyl photographic signs, mostly because the way that they really look in the city is as though something is unfinished. It's sort of in progress. This space is not leased yet. All of it looks, it doesn't look right. And I too am not convinced about the security thing. I mean, I accept that might be an issue, but there are other solves for that, like special films on the actual monitors that everybody uses in order to be able to mask and kind of camouflage content from a distance. So I think that can be done. But so what then? I mean, I think it would be, it's exciting and it's thrilling to get a real huge supermarket down here. I think and for it to be seen on the street, but I don't know that but I also think that there are other things like a certain kind of the lighting, sort of the general messiness of it and all of those things that might want to be, that the applicants may want to conceal. So my suggestion would be some kind of opaque band that, in other words, I'm not opposed to film specifically, but for it to potentially either begin above the bulkhead, or whatever that is at the ground, and go to an X height so that one sees from the outside the lighting or the continuous interior space above a certain height, whether that be 5 feet or 6 feet or whatever that is, and just before it gets to the secondary band. I don't think it's about less of them. I think it's about a much more toned down, not photographic graphics and not the full dimension of the window, of the storefront window.
Okay.
But ending short and or starting higher and acting like an opaque color band or film band.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Halford Smith.
Yes, I agree with the comments previously stated, but especially with Adi's comment. I think the fact that the vinyl covers the majority of the window is the issue. And if it were a band or if it were something that's stopped, 2 or 3 feet lower than the spandrel to allow light through and activity and just the presence of the store behind, I think that would go a long way to relieving the presence of all this graphic.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Yeah, I agree with the previous commissioners' comments. I think that the rooftop addition is fine. I actually have shopped at a lot of Wegmans in Massachusetts, as my son's family has lived in several different small towns there. And most recently, this last weekend, I was in a Wegmans. So I think that the choice of their logo color is very nice and very discreet here and works very well. However, I also find that the opacity of all the windows is really quite atypical of what we permit at this type of building. So they need, Adi's suggestion is certainly an interesting one that might be a good solution, or else in some other manner reducing the amount of window coverage or using vitrines, something to just give a different sense of the opacity of these windows, I think is important. But the rest of the proposal, I think, is totally fine.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
I agree with the general consensus. I think that the rooftop stuff is acceptable, even though it's visible. I think that Adi's idea about cutting down the graphics is appropriate, and I think the other 2 kinds of signs are fine.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Devonshire?
Yep, I agree with that. The rooftop accretions are acceptable. The 1 and 2 signs are good. I agree completely with Adi's idea about having it be a certain height up to perhaps eye level for the promotional signage. And she is absolutely correct. There are films that can be applied to computer screens that make them invisible to others other than the person who's right in front of the screen. So the security thing is not even an issue.
Okay. Commissioner Chen,
I think I agree with the consensus.
Commissioner Bland.
I'll make it unanimous, I think. Everybody dislikes the proposal for the promotional signs. But I think maybe I'm in the minority now. I would eliminate them and just deal with that on something on the inside of the glass. I think it's so important to have visible, active sidewalks in New York. So, but everything else is fine, including the roof and the other signage. But I dislike the promotional signs intensely.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much. I think we have enough to approve it with the condition that they reduce the height of the graphics in the windows and that they also study the amount of amount of graphics, let's say. So some can be more neutral than others, working in consultation with the staff. So Commissioner Lutfi, would you be comfortable making a motion to approve it with the condition that, or recommending that they work with the staff to reduce and simplify the graphics signage in the windows? Great, thanks. And just remember to unmute again.
Yeah, I guess you didn't hear me say yes.
I saw you nod. I read your mouth. So yes.
Okay, in the matter of LPC docket 22-08334-770 Broadway, No Historic District, a Renaissance style, revival style department store building designed by D.H. Burnham and Company and built in 1903-07. With an addition built in 1924-25. The application is to install signage and mechanical equipment. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the NoHo Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the work will not damage, eliminate, or conceal any significant features, that there is historic precedent for large signs on the facades at commercial buildings in this historic district. Therefore, the presence of large signs will not draw undue attention or detract from the streetscape, that the transom signs will be well scaled to the two-story storefront infill on this full block building, that the locations of the transom signs will be limited to the main entrance on Lafayette Street and at the prominent corners on East 8th and East 9th Streets and will not overwhelm the facades. That the signage at the transoms featuring green and brushed gold finished metal and halo lighting will be in keeping with signage found throughout the district. That the designs and color palettes of the seasonal applied vinyl signage at the display windows will be of colors that do not detract from significant architectural features of the building or streetscape, that the generator at the roof will be installed adjacent to existing cooling towers and will not result in significant increase in the bulk or visibility of these mechanical equipment installations, that the generator will only be visible from public thoroughfares at a distance in the context of other utilitarian rooftop accretions, that the cooling towers are the smallest and fewest number of units necessary to accommodate the needs of the tenant and in the only feasible location due to existing equipment, bulkheads, water towers, and amenity spaces at the roof, that the presence of the cooling towers within views at a distance and in close proximity to other rooftop accretions on this monumental building will not detract from the silhouette or significant architectural features of the building, that the mechanical equipment will be neutral in color, helping them to blend with surrounding rooftop accretions, and that the work will support the preservation and reuse of a large portion of the ground floor of this building. However, I find that the large applied vinyl signage located at 6 storefront bays at the northeast corner of Lafayette and East 9th Street will substantially diminish the transparency of the display windows at those bays. Therefore, I recommend that the applicant work with staff to reduce the number of of vinyls in these windows, and
I think,
also to simplify.
Jeannie, I think we're just reducing the size within the window
I'm
openings.
sorry, to reduce the size within the window of these displays.
And simplify the graphics.
And simplify the graphics.
Okay. All right. I think that follows the recommendation. So Commissioner Holford Smith, would you second that motion?
I second it.
All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin, Commissioner, is she here?
Aye, sorry.
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Nay.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 10 in favor and 1 opposed, the motion passes.
So that's approved with the condition that you work with the staff on those 6 window films. So we're going to try to do, we are very behind schedule, but we are going to try to do one more before we break for lunch. And we'll go to the next public hearing item, and we'll try to move through that one quickly and then take a lunch break and come back for the rest of the agenda.
Okay, so we'll move to public hearing item number 3, LPC 22-07058, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 587, Lot 11, 24 Commerce Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District. This is a late federal style row house built in 1821, and the application is to enlarge a dormer.
Hey, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing, and you now have control of the presentation. You just need to click on your screen. And then you can advance the slides using your arrow keys or your mouse. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Kelvin Seo from Seo Architects speaking for non-visible rear shed dormer extension at 24 Commerce Street. This property is located in a triangular shaped block defined by Commerce Street on the north and 7th Avenue South on the east, and Bedford Street on the west, and the site is on Commerce Street facing north. The house is located in the south of Greenwich Village Historic District and near the border of 7th Avenue South. This is the block plan. As mentioned, the house is one of 3 federal style row houses constructed in 1821. And these 3 row houses are surrounded by taller buildings. On the east side, we have 4-story residential building, 20 Commerce, and also west corner of the block, we have 6-story mixed-use building, 72 Bedford Street. And the south of that, we have 70 Bedford Street, also 4-story residential building. And it's not indicated in here, but it has a 1-story extension infilling the gap between 70 and 72 Bedford Street. We have so the rear yard of these 3 row houses are not visible from the Bedford Street. And the south of our property, we have a 4-story mixed-use building, 54 7th Avenue South. This text photo showing the history of the building and the 1940s text photo has the fire escape on the 2nd story and then the attic level, but it's disappeared after sometime after 1980s. The building front facade has been painted and then painted white, and it's peeled off over the time. And the current photo is showing the well preserved front facade, like overall massing, and then the window openings and the front door opening, and also the dormer at the top, gabled roof. this photo is showing a 26 and 28 Commerce and also 72 Bedford Street. This is view from the attic terrace level. And this is showing the 20 Commerce, which is from the view from the rear yard ground level. And then the next photo is showing the 54 7th Avenue South, and yeah, this photo is showing the Bedford 70 Bedford Street and 72 Bedford Street, and also 28 and 26 Commerce. So previously we had approved by step level for the rear yard extension on first and second floor level, and this application is only for the roof modification for rear shed dormer extension on the attic level. And, the scope of work is only demolishing the 60% of the rear roof, and we are keeping the 40% as it is. This is showing the perspective of existing on the left and proposing on the right. We have previously approved the HVAC unit on the rear terrace level, and demolishing the shed dormer for the terrace door and the extension to the east side of the roof. This is showing the existing condition of the roof, and this is the proposed the shed extension. The material-wise, we're using the polymer shingle, which is previously approved by step level, to match with the cedar shingle, which has the 5-inch exposure, and we're matching to that. And then also have the siding also have a James Hardy board, ivory color, to the side of the dormer, and then also the rear wall of the attic. This is another view of the existing the roof, and then this is the proposed.
Mr. So, I think we could stop there on that rendering, as it sort of gives us a good picture of the application. And there is a samples board towards the end if we need to refer back to that.
Okay, thank you. All right, commissioners, do we have any questions? Right, I don't see any questions at this time, so let's move to public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to testify on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you, and I'll turn it over to Sasha Sealy to take us through the testimony.
Thank you. So I don't have any signups for this item, so I'm just going to take a glance over at the attendees and see if we have any hands raised, and I do not see any hands raised, so there is no one who wishes to speak on this item. But I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 2 recommends approval of this application, and I will turn it back over to you, Chair Carroll.
Great, thank you very much, Sasha. Okay, so commissioners, if there are no final questions, and nobody, okay, so I've just sent you all requests to unmute so we can close the hearing and begin our discussion. And Commissioner Lutfi, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Devonshire, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And this is for a non-visible portion of a sloped roof where there's an existing dormer and they essentially want to expand it in width with the new shed dormer. It would maintain about a third of the sloped roof in its original profile, and they would be using materials that would otherwise be eligible for staff level review at non-visible rear facades. So let's begin that discussion. Commissioner Gustafson, would you start this one?
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward for me. Of all the hellish things we've seen done to federal style buildings, this is this is respectful and barely touching it. It's not visible, and the materials are acceptable. This is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shamir Baran.
I think it's kind of too bad because the centered dormer and understanding that it's both on the front and on the back in the way that it was originally designed would have been sweet. It seems as though the adjacent properties have also, is that the case, Chair Carroll, extended their dormers?
Yes,
over time.
They have.
So that's what makes it kind of appropriate in my mind, though unfortunate, but I can see approving it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith.
I think this is appropriate. It's a modest addition. It seems respectful to the existing building and does preserve a portion of the original roof slope. So I can find it appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chafin.
Yeah, I agree with what previous commissioners have been saying. It's not visible, it's modest, and it's part of the roof line. And I think it's similar to other things that we have previously approved. So I can approve it as presented.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Devonshire.
I think it's fine, quite appropriate.
Commissioner Chen.
I agree.
Commissioner Bland.
Yes, modest, appropriate.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Very appropriate.
And Commissioner Jefferson.
Appropriate.
Okay, I think we all agree this is appropriate. It's modest, not visible from any public way, retains a portion of the sloped roof, and is in the context of large apartment buildings and 2 other buildings in the row that have also had altered dormers. So Commissioner Gustafson, would you go ahead and make the motion?
Boy, hungry commissioners are efficient commissioners, aren't they? In the matter of LPC 220705A 24 Commerce Street, Greenwich Village Historic District, the application is to construct a dormer. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Greenwich Village Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the introduction of shed dormers has precedence on row houses of this type and period, that the proposed enlargement of the dormer will not be visible from any public thoroughfare, that the construction of a dormer on the east side of the roof to the lot line wall has precedent at the adjacent row house, reflecting the location of the existing original stairway, that the composite shingles and hardy board siding of the enlarged shed dormer will recall the historic cedar shake shingle and wooden clapboard materials of adjacent dormers in this row, that the proposed dormer will be pulled away from the opposite party wall, retaining a portion of the slope of the federal style roof, and that the work will not detract from the special architectural or historic character of the building or the Greenwich Village Historic District.
Thank you. And Commissioner Devonshire, would you second the motion?
Second.
All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Bland. Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Baran.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum. He left. Commissioner Gustafson.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 10 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, that's approved. Thank you. So we will now take a break for lunch and we'll return at 1:30 and we'll resume with public hearing item number 4, which is, we are significantly behind schedule, but we'll do what we can in the afternoon to catch up. So we'll ask all members of the public to exit the meeting now and rejoin the meeting at 1:30. And commissioners, you just need to turn your audio and video off. Thank you.